Chapter 939. This caused the spectators to be greatly disappointed. In the past few years, they had gotten used to the domineering behavior of the four Lingzhou ruffians. According to common sense, all crows in the world were as black as one another. Shouldn't the winner of the competition of backing and family background be the one to take care of those pitiful fellows who lost? Otherwise, how could they be the playboys of Lingzhou if they were so friendly? Wang Wolfting asked curiously. What is going on? Are you trying to make an example out of the Lingzhou officials and the families of these people to lower their heads? But looking at the current situation, it doesn't look like you're really going to kill them. If you really want to wait until those officials arrive before you kill them, then you can only kill them verbally and it will be hard for them to accept it. Sun Yin said slowly, the worst plan is to kill randomly, killing the playboys and officials to establish our might in the eyes of the people of Lingzhou. In the end, it will make the military officials and officials of Lingzhou and the officials of the Yamen work together against a common enemy. The current situation is like burning our eyebrows. The best plan is to not kill anyone and treat it as doing a favor to those families. At least, they won't look too bad in the future. Both sides will be at peace for the time being. But it won't help with the situation in Lingzhou. The soldiers at the border of Yu and Liang will look down on His Royal Highness. The best plan, in the current situation, there is almost no best plan to speak of. Wang Wolfting smiled. Almost. Sun Yin said calmly, there is, but I don't think His Royal Highness can do it. Wang Wolfting continued to ask, tell me about it. Sun Yin gave a rare smile. If it ends up muddle-headedly and you treat me to good wine and I get drunk, I'll tell you. Anyway, in Beiliang, I, Sun Yin, am destined to be neither high nor low. Since I can't live happily, then I can only drink happily. After the time it took for 4 incense sticks to burn, horses galloped over one after another. Fortunately, most of them were generals and had excellent horsemanship. There was only one civil official who had never been on the battlefield, but he was also quick-witted. He let his squire ride the horse and rode with him. He did not care about his bearing and demeanor, and hugged the squire's waist tightly. The captain of the Yu cavalry, Dong Hongqiu, was the furthest away, but he still arrived at the same time as the civil official. Of the 4 military officials who arrived before him, one was the director of the Lingzhou army, one was a general with a title, and 2 military captains with real power. They were all kneeling on the ground with their descendants. That foppish playboy who had fainted after hitting the wall was also dragged over. Lord Zhou, who was in charge of the county's documents, also ran away quickly. His body was faster than Dong Yueqi, and he fell to the ground neatly. He cried, Humble Zhou Jianshu pays his respect to His Royal Highness. My unfilial son has disturbed His Royal Highness. I deserve to die. One must know that this Lord Zhou of the Lingzhou army was one of the people who had entered the general's residence that day. In the study room, he had received His Royal Highness's promise. Even if he did not get promoted and become rich, at least no matter how Lingzhou rose and fell, he, Zhou Jianshu, would still be able to keep his position as the 3rd highest civil official in Lingzhou. Young Master Zhou riding the white-hoofed shadow was the unfilial son that Lord Zhou had mentioned. Even Zhou Zhizhong, who had Commander Yan Wenluan as his back, had obediently knelt down. The director of the army and the military captains all felt a little better. Only Dong Yueqi remained standing. He cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, Humble General Dong Hongqiu pays his respect to His Royal Highness. He was standing, but His Royal Highness was still squatting. Zhou Zhizhong saw this scene from the corner of his eyes. He lowered his head a little more, but the corners of his lips curled up. The entire Lingzhou officialdom knew that Dong Hongqiu was old General Zhong's trusted subordinate. Furthermore, because Dong Hongqiu had joined the army at a young age, he was a military official who had experienced the Spring and Autumn War. Otherwise, he would not have been able to become the captain of Lingzhou's Yu Qi. Who knew how many generals who had retired from the border were eyeing this kind of prominent position? If one did not have any true ability, even if they were lucky enough to become one, they would be kicked down. In truth, even the normal citizens who did not like Dong Zhen and Zhou Jianshu felt that it was right for Dong Yueqi to not kneel to His Royal Highness who had no achievements. His Royal Highness gripped his Beiliang blade and slowly stood up. He did not fly into a rage like Dong Hongqiu had expected. He did not even try to use his status as Beiliang's heir or Lingzhou's general to force him to kneel. Han Laozhan, who was standing respectfully behind His Royal Highness, was about to take a step forward when Su Fengnian waved his hand. Su Fengnian stood with the blade in his hand. His hands were gently placed on the hilt of the blade. He said with a slight smile, "Everyone, do not worry. This heir has not suffered much. It is not that your sons and grandsons do not want to commit sins, but that they do not have the ability. It does not matter if they are wastrels who can't do anything right or if they are parasites who only know how to enjoy their achievements. It does not have much to do with this heir. This heir has been unreasonable in Baelyong for almost 20 years. There are indeed many things that are unreasonable. In this aspect, I am just like your sons and grandsons. However, using this opportunity today, I want to tell you about a small principle that this heir knows." Dong Yuechi sneered and said, "Oh? Since His Royal Highness has the leisure to do this, I am willing to hear the details." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Actually, there is no need for this heir to say anything. Come, other than Sir Zhizhong, help the other officials take off their armor." The military officials kneeling on the ground all suddenly raised their heads. After being stunned, they could not hide their anger. Among them, the military official who was over 50 years old stood up with a dark expression. "I have risked my life for your Su family to have the glory I have today. Now, all of this wealth belongs to me. I can be killed, but not humiliated. Although my grandson has offended his superiors, he has not harmed you at all. Even if you are the eldest son of the great general and His Royal Highness of our Baelyong, my grandson's life is not good. He lost to you, a young man who could immediately become a general of Lingzhou. If you, Su Fengnian, want to beat him, I will accept it. However, if you want to humiliate me, there is no way. I have lived for so long. I don't believe that you would dare to kill all of these people on the streets. If that is the case, then I was blind to work for your Su family in the past." After the surplus general and the two captains looked at each other, they gritted their teeth and stood up. The group of commoners who could only see the general situation from afar had already begun to cheer loudly. There were people who said that the men of Lingzhou were good. There were also people who whispered to each other that these officials were not good at being officials, but their temperaments were to their liking. Pei Nanwei looked at the back of that figure. She couldn't help but recall the soul-stirring scene she had witnessed all those years ago in the reed marsh outside Xiongfan City. She, who should have been rejoicing in other people's misfortune, was a bit dispirited. Su Fengnian did not use his blade. He only tilted his head slightly. Han Laozhan, who was already filled with killing intent, rushed out and kicked the unyielding Dong Yuechi forward. Han Laozhan then elbowed him in the back. Dong Hongqiu's 170 to 80 catty burly body was forcefully smashed onto the street, causing dust to fly everywhere. Dong Yuechi, who even the administrator in Lingzhou could not order around, was now lying on the ground. He struggled to get up, but Han Laozhan, who had already deliberately restrained his strength, stepped on his back. He had completely become a dead dog covered in dust. All of the commoners were terrified. Zhou Jianshu's throat moved as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Dong Zhen and Zhou Jianshu's group were so shocked that their faces lost all color. Even the old soldier of Lingzhou, who had not heard the horn of the battlefield for a long time and had not seen the smoke of the battlefield for a long time, began to tremble. Su Fengnian raised his Baelyong blade and pointed at the corporal whose legs were trembling. "Go, take off all of Sir Dong's clothes. Take it off one after the other." Su Fengnian gloomily added, "I'm rarely reasonable. Don't be ungrateful when you're enjoying it." Dong Yuechi let out a tragic roar. After he was not stopped by Han Laozhan, he staggered up. "I, Yuechi Field Officer Dong Hongqiu, will take off my armor today. From today onwards, I am no longer a soldier of Baelyong." The soldier's eyes were also red. His voice was hoarse as he laughed. "Go to your mother. What kind of Lingzhou official is this? Huang Zhong will also take off his armor." Thus, other than the civil official Zhou Jianshu, everyone else took off their arms in the middle of winter. It was both comical and tragic. Back then, for General Su Shao, he put on his armor and fought to the death. Now, because of His Royal Highness, he took off his armor. The commoners did not know who was the leader, but they became more and more furious. If it was not for the normal soldiers blocking their path, they would have charged forward like a swarm of bees. That damned His Royal Highness just stood there coldly and did not move at all. Wang Wolfting, who was mixed in the crowd, turned his head and asked with trembling lips, "Sun Yin, what should we do?" Sun Yin narrowed his eyes and stared at that person of the same age without saying a word. Dong Zhen threw away her horsewhip and stood beside her father. She covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Sir Ji Zhong was also forcefully helped up by his unfilial son. Su Fengyan's eyes were cold as he said calmly, Dong Hongqiu, currently a grade 4 U cavalry captain in Lingzhou. 26 years ago, he joined Su Zhao's army and followed Chu Lushan to open Shu. He was the first to reach the top of Chunshan Pass. In this battle he was stabbed 4 times. Huang Zhong, currently a grade 4 military officer in Lingzhou. During the Battle of Xiangfan City, he was a death warrior of the vanguard camp. He climbed the city wall 6 times and was injured 6 times until he could no longer fight. Of the 800 death warriors of the vanguard camp, only 19 survived after the battle. Hong Yuan, together with his brothers Honghe and Hong Shan, were the first crossbowmen in Liangzhou. Together, they cut off 21 heads of Beimang scouts. His brothers died one after another. Hong Yuan was heavily injured and could not even hold a teacup in his right hand. He had no choice but to retreat from the border. Su Shao personally gave him the title of General Wei Yuan and promised that his eldest son could become an official when he was 20 years old. His Royal Highness did not even look at the other 2 fellows who relied on their father's contributions or silver to become captains. His Royal Highness held the Bailiang knife and turned to leave. He only left behind one sentence. Those who stand beside these 3, go and count the scars on your ancestors and fathers. Chapter 940. Although the west side of Lingzhou was not as wealthy as the north side, there were many crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Most of the officials lived here. The inside story of the disturbance quickly spread throughout the taverns. Wang Lofting and Sun Yin chose a restaurant that specialized in Jianan spring stew. They sat on the second floor near the railing and ordered the famous Camel's Peak stew that shook Bailiang. The clamor downstairs could not be separated from the farce on Wenquan Street. At first, they were cursing His Royal Highness's unscrupulous actions and humiliating Dong Yueqi, Huang Bing, Cao Cao, and the valiant bravery General Hong Yuan. Not only did he use his status as Lingzhou's general to force them to kneel, he also wanted them to bare their upper bodies. This made the 3 so angry that they did not hesitate to take off their armors to express their intentions. They were determined to leave Bailiang and no longer work for the Su family. Afterwards, a few sharp-sighted officials joined in and found out that the matter was not so simple. It turned out that the young masters of the Dong and Zhou families rode their horses on the street to pick a fight with His Royal Highness first. They even mobilized soldiers to encircle this Lingzhou general. This made the outsiders who were cursing Su Fengyan for being a good-for-nothing restrain themselves. They still muttered that it was just a dog-eat-dog situation and that none of them were good people. Afterwards, more and more officials who knew the inside story revealed the truth. Endless rumors flowed into the various manors and restaurants of Lingzhou. Only then did the truth come to light. As a result, for the first time ever, Lingzhou, with its strong folk customs, became silent. The group of people who were the first to curse His Royal Highness the most fiercely were stunned with a guilty conscience. Wang Lofting saw and heard this and felt relieved. He put down his chopsticks and saw that Sun Yin was still unmoved. He picked up some fragrant Camel's Peak meat with his chopsticks and put it in his mouth. Wang Lofting asked with a smile, "This is your best plan?" At the time, I didn't know what your highness said. Without drawing a knife or killing anyone, you were actually able to make Dong Yueqi kneel in front of your highness back. I thought you were using the king of Bailiang and the lives of the entire clan to force Dong Yueqi to lower his head. 2 old men who have been through hundreds of battles. One hugged his armor and cried while the other began to beat his grandson on the street. Interesting. Sun Yin shook his head and said, "It's true that I had a plan, but your highness gave me the plan." In this way, not only would Dong Hongqiu and the others be convinced, but they would also not naively kowtow to the crown prince. At the very least, these few people would continue to be grateful to the second generation of the Su family for not forgetting their meritorious service. This would make the straightforward military officials feel more at ease than any verbal promise. They would be able to temporarily behave themselves in their respective circles, and be willing to tactfully take a step back for His Highness the Crown Prince out of gratitude. However, the most important thing was that a crack appeared in the tight circle of Lingzhou's military officials. The military officials who had personally fought on the battlefield and the children of generals who had become officials because of their father's contributions would inevitably begin to size each other up. They would no longer be as close as before. As for the Su officials and Yamen who were the most familiar with changing the rudder, seeing that the upper echelons appeared united but were divided at heart, they would naturally do their work obediently. No one was stupid. The Lingzhou general could even subdue Dong Yueqi, who was supported by General Zhong Hongwu. So wouldn't it be easy for him to take care of them, this group of low-class shrimp soldiers and crab generals? The more His Royal Highness held the imperial sword in his hand, the higher he raised it but did not land on anyone, the more it would make people feel fear. Right now, His Highness still did not use the might of the King of Bailiang to chop down Dong Yueqi's yellow soldiers. Instead, he was thinking about their old friendship and using reason. However, His Royal Highness was a vicious person who even dared to make a move on Zhong Hongwu. In the past, no one praised him for his shrewdness. Everyone knew that the Lingzhou general was not a kind person with a bodhisattva's heart. Everyone guessed that there would be a bloody disaster in Lingzhou sooner or later. There would definitely be blood. Pushing down layer by layer, the administrator who lived in seclusion did not move. Zhou Jianshu, who had been kneeling the entire time, did not move. Right now, even the arrogant military officer behind Dong Yueqi did not move. Lu Ting, who do you think will be next? Wang Lufting smiled knowingly. It can only be that group of Su officials who did not have a good year in Lingzhou's officialdom. Although you and I know that His Highness will not go as far as to glare at them, they do not know. They will only feel that a knife has fallen on their head. It will not fall and it will make them wish they were dead. Sun Yi nodded his head with a lonely expression. Wang Lufting asked softly. His Highness has such a mind and you are still not willing to become an official? Sun Yi retorted. What kind of official? A county magistrate in charge of politics? An assistant to the governor of Lingzhou's 7 counties? Or an assistant to the governor's manor? Without waiting for Wang Lufting to persuade him, Sun Yi laughed coldly. I can't even do it well. It is important to know oneself. Only by knowing oneself can one understand others. I, Sun Yi, have high standards but low abilities. After becoming a county magistrate, I have no one to rely on and I am not willing to spend my time on dealing with those arrogant Su officials. If they want to take care of me, it will be easy. Even if His Highness is my backer, these stubborn people have many hidden methods to cut my flesh with a soft knife. No matter what I do, my hands and feet are tied. There is no one around me that I can use and I cannot pass down any policies. In the end, it will cause the economy of my jurisdiction to wither and the people to have no way of making a living. Forget about the all-people's umbrella when I leave my post and get promoted. I am afraid I will be criticized by the people in the county every day. Could it be that when I, Sun Yi, become a county magistrate, I have to ask His Royal Highness to give me a large group of capable Su officials? As for assisting the governor and serving the provincial governor, Sun Yin's ability wasn't much better than his. Perhaps His Highness is a wise ruler who is sentimental and worthy of you, Wang Lufting, submitting to him, worthy of Dong Yueqi and the others to change their impression of him, worthy of the 300,000 steel cavalry at the border to die for him. But to Sun Yi, it is useless. Wang Lufting was slightly dejected. This was like the love between a man and a woman. There was a woman who was clearly very good, but he just did not like her. The two of them left the restaurant that was still bustling with noise and excitement. Compared to the past in Lingzhou City, it was obvious that there were many more elegant scholars who spoke with foreign accents. Wang Lufting's heart was heavy as he walked into a secluded alley. Sun Yi did not like extravagance, so Wang Lufting found him a clean house that was hidden in this alley. The somewhat tipsy Sun Yi said self-mockingly, Sun Yin's skills of learning and writing are unconventional, surpassing the ancients. It is a pity that the dragon-slaying skills that people ridiculed in the ancient books are indeed useless in Bailiang. Lufting, you don't have to persuade me anymore. If you reject His Highness' invitation and become a private tutor in Zijin's Wang family, His Highness will be indebted to you and see you in a new light. Just treat it as Sun Yin's debt to Zijin for all these years. Wang Lufting gritted his teeth and said, Sun Yi, with your talent and knowledge, how can you be a private tutor for the rest of your life? In the history books, it is natural that Wang Lufting is missing, but it is absolutely impossible that you, Sun Yi, are missing. Wait until I finish weaving gold thread. I will send you there even if I have to die. Without waiting for Wang Lufting to finish, Sun Yi angrily said, Shut up. This residential area was crisscrossed with alleys. But at night, it was deserted and quiet. A cough from a dark corner was particularly ear-piercing. Wang Lufting felt as if he was struck by lightning and his face turned pale. Sun Yi sighed. They stopped in their tracks and saw a young master wearing a mink felt hat walk out of the shadows and greet them with a smile. Wang Lufting slowly knelt down and shut his mouth. He had just obtained riches and honor and was about to be toppled again. The affairs of the world were truly unpredictable. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If you, Wang Ting, didn't have such feelings and only knew how to curry favor in the bureaucracy, you would be the next Yan Jieshi Jean Lanting. I really wouldn't feel at ease putting you in such an important position in the weaving bureau. Get up." Chapter 941. Sun Yin helped Wang Ting up and said calmly, "Sun Yin, His Highness is speaking from the bottom of his heart. In the future, don't worry about your golden thread weaving, don't feel guilty towards me." Now that things have come to this, Sun Yin will also speak from the bottom of his heart. "After meeting His Highness, my life has already been thrown on the chopping block. I might not be able to keep it. If nothing goes wrong, I will most likely die quietly. Only with Sun Yin's death can you, Wang Ting, Bailiang, and the imperial court have an explanation. Back then, when you kidnapped me to Lingzhou and asked me why it was like I was going to die so generously, this is the reason." Su Fengnian looked at Sun Yin. "I can give my dragon-slaying skills a chance to be used, but I can't guarantee that it will be 10 or 20 years, or that it won't be successful in the end. However, for you, Sun Yin, at least there is a glimmer of hope. Do you want to make a big deal with me?" Unlike Wang Ting, who looked like he had lost his parents, Sun Yin remained calm and said with a smile, "If it was before today, Sun Yin wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. However, at this time and place, I am willing to listen to His Highness' opinion. If Sun Yin feels that there is profit to be made, then this deal is done. In any case, Sun Yin only has one life. He has a stomach full of knowledge that is inappropriate for the times, so he won't lose much." Su Fengnian, who appeared alone, turned around and left. Sun Yin slowly followed. Wang Ting, whose limbs were weak, could only lean against the wall and gasp for breath. Wang Ting, who stood in the same place, originally thought that Sun Yin's life and death were uncertain. The best scenario would be him coming back alive. He didn't expect Sun Yin to return with a smile in just the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. His eyes were bright and full of spirit. Sun Yin held the young master of the Wang family of Zijin's hand and said with a smile, "Ting, this is the last time we will see each other in this life." Wang Ting said in surprise, "His Highness still wants you to die?" Sun Yin shook his head and smiled. "Bad plan." Wang Ting heaved a sigh of relief. "Could it be that he wants you to be his trusted aide? In the future, I'll give advice and suggestions to His Highness?" Sun Yin still shook his head. Medium strategy. Wang Ting, who had already tasted the bitterness of speaking too much, had an uncertain expression on his face. Sun Yin, who knew what he was thinking, still laughed and said, "It's still the best plan." Her Highness once again gave Sun Yin a pleasant surprise. "Lu Ting, don't think too much about it. You won't be able to figure it out even if you break your head. If not for this, how could you deceive Zhang Julu, these old foxes?" Wang Ting gripped Sun Yin with all his strength and said with a laugh, "I'm not going to make a fuss over nothing, as long as you're living well. Wang Ting will be waiting quietly in Bailiang for you to go to the capital and win 3 prizes in a row. At that time, who in the world won't know you?" Sun Yin said in a low voice, "Earlier, I was watching the fire burning across the river and had nothing to do. In my mind, I have a set of 6 strategies to deal with the situation in Bailiang. Come, let's go back to our residence. Sun Yin will write it out for you. With this, you'll have the right to be a golden thread weaver. After that, there are also some rough drafts regarding the trend of the imperial court. I'll write them all for you. When the time comes, you can polish them a little. In the future, you might be able to become the provincial governor of Lingzhou. Tomorrow, I'll be returning to Huangnam County. You have to stay in the provincial capital. Tonight, the 2 of us will have a long talk. How about it?" Wang Ting said with a laugh, "I'm used to sharing a bed with my wife. If I fall asleep, be careful that I don't touch you." Sun Yin laughed loudly. Wang Ting had never seen Sun Yin laugh so happily before. In another small alley, Su Fengnian and Su Beiji walked side by side. Pei Nanwei followed behind them. Su Beiji said slowly, "According to the information from the spies around the 2 of them, Sun Yin learned the rare dragon-slaying technique and not the dragon-riding technique. My grandfather had this idea before and told me about it in bits and pieces. However, he didn't dare to write it down. Are you really willing to let him go to the capital to be a chess piece that he might not be able to use for the rest of his life?" Su Fengnian said with a smile, "The Liang Imperial Court started with Tang Tu Su, the great scholar of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, to the old Grand Secretary Liu Yongho, and then to the current Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. No matter how the methods of governing the imperial court changed, regardless of whether it was the Liu faction or the Zhang faction, the core and will hidden in the depths were actually of the same origin. For example, in the past, the Han family in Jizhou and the number one person in the cabinet, Liu Yongho, were entangled in gratitude and grudges. The old Grand Secretary couldn't take down the Han family. After the mantle was passed on to Zhang Julu, he took the opportunity to borrow the emperor's knife to kill people, implicating 9 generations of the Han family. In the struggle between factions in the imperial court, the most important thing is inheritance. It's not much different from the virtues of aristocratic families. On the surface, the current Minister of Revenue, Wang Xiongui, is the number one disciple of Zhang Julu. However, my Shifu said that Wang Xionggui's vision is not big, far inferior to Zhang Julu's. The Emperor and Yuan Benshi are probably happy to let Wang Xiongui take over the Zhang faction, but they definitely won't let him become the Grand Secretary. Zhang Julu and Huan Wen are also clear on this point. With Zhang Julu's personality, he's not afraid of being punished after his death. Even if his entire family is executed, he won't be soft-hearted. The Emperor's scheming is to get rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness. Zhang Julu is afraid that when the time comes, his ruling strategy will be changed by the imperial court. In the beginning, my Shifu allowed Jean Lanting to go to the capital because he knew that this person was not capable of taking on such a big responsibility. He also had the thought of plotting against Zhang Julu. However, now that Yao Baifeng publicly reprimanded Zhang Julu in the Imperial College, I reckon that Zhang Julu is also somewhat vigilant. Perhaps he's already prepared to replace Wang Xiongui, who will be at the helm of the Zhang faction in the future. Sun Yin's departure this time is just right. Of course, Sun Yin's usefulness is far from being that simple. Right now, what Bailiang needs to do is to make Sun Yin's journey to the capital very difficult and bumpy. This is an enormous secret. I plan to bypass Wutong'an and let Chu Lushan personally handle it. Su Beiji smiled and said, "Are you afraid that Wutong'an doesn't have enough experience? Or are you afraid that Second Princess will be too mentally and physically exhausted? Or is it because the peregrine falcon that hit Chu Lushan with a stick last year will reward him with a date to eat during the new year?" Su Beiji suddenly saw that Su Fengnian's expression was cold. Su Beiji's thoughts were very sharp. He was shocked and no longer joked. Su Beiji lamented in his heart. It wasn't easy to deliberately add oil to the fire of the imperial court. Bailiang's own family also couldn't escape one disaster after another. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "Being His Royal Highness and Lingzhou's general is already so tiring. Tell me, if he were to be the emperor of the world, how much effort would he have to put in?" Su Beiji smiled and said, "An emperor who knows how to use people is actually not as tiring as you think." Su Fengnian twirled the copper coin between his fingers and dismissed it with a smile. Han Laozhan almost couldn't take it anymore. He reported softly, "Your Highness, we've received news that a pair of master and servant with unknown backgrounds entered the country from Lingzhou's Hanxi County. They declared that they would meet Your Highness, who brought the head of the 5th Raccoon back to Liangzhou. Hanxi County sent out 2 groups of more than 400 soldiers, but they couldn't stop them. Your Highness, this is the portrait of that pair of master and servant." Su Fengnian was confused. He took the 2 pieces of paper with the portrait. On the paper were detailed words and deeds. After he finished reading, he passed them to Su Beiji and smiled. "This brother is very arrogant. In the middle of winter, he's holding a fan of peach blossoms and beauties. He said that he's going to draw all the rouge on the 20 women on both sides of the book. He's really romantic. Juzi, take a look. His looks are also the kind that can make female heroes fall in love. He's even better than you. Are you jealous?" Su Beiji was puzzled and asked, "When did such a person appear in Jianghu? What realm is he at?" Su Fengnian said casually, "He dares to strut around Bailiang so openly. Furthermore, he's pointing his spear at me, Su Fengnian. If he's not at the 1st rank, isn't he courting death? Since he mentioned the 5th Raccoon, his tone is extremely arrogant. I reckon that he's referring to the mystic realm." Han Laozhan asked softly, "Your Highness, Su Yanbing isn't in Lingzhou. What if I leave the provincial capital to intercept this person?" Su Fengnian smiled coldly and said, "You don't have to go. Just see if he has the ability to come to the provincial capital. Once he's here, then see if he has the ability to leave alive." Chapter 942. The banquet ended happily and the officials stood up to leave. Su Fengnian and the newly appointed provincial governor did not move, so the Lingzhou governor, Song Yan, had no choice but to take up the responsibility of sending off the guests. When he walked around the magnificent screen wall and returned to the main hall of the official residence, he saw His Royal Highness and the provincial governor walking over together. Song Yan quickly went up to greet him. Su Fengnian said with a gentle smile, "Song Biejia will probably have to stay here for half a day. Your official residence still needs some time and manpower. Go buy things and clean it up. If it was someone else, it would be fine, but Song Biejia is an important guest that I have invited to the provincial capital. I cannot neglect him at all. I hope that official Song can be more tolerant." Song Yan said in fear and trepidation, "Your Highness is thinking too much. This lowly official is not boasting, but it is true that I do not care about these worldly possessions. Your Highness really does not need to worry about the residents. This lowly official is not a clean official. Over the years, I have also accumulated a substantial amount of wealth. Even if every inch of land in Lingzhou City is expensive, I can still afford to buy a residence that I like. I can take this opportunity to spend all the money that I have embezzled. In the future, if this lowly official dares to extort the people's wealth in Lingzhou, I will have to trouble your Highness to send people to confiscate the residence. Just treat it as contributing to Lingzhou's tax collection." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "I cannot say this to others. I can be honest with you, Song Yan. If other officials are corrupt and take bribes, as long as they are caught by me, even if I don't take off their official status and punish them, I will make them spit out whatever they have taken. However, you, Song Yan, can be lenient. As long as you have contributed to Lingzhou, it is not a big deal to take the money and put it in your personal pocket. I'm not the kind of person who can't tolerate sand in my eyes. I'll leave these words here today. In the future, if Su Beiji dares to use this to threaten you, you can complain to me. This prince will definitely support you. Also, the reason why I bought you a mansion is not to buy your heart. I am not that free and you will not be bought by me so easily. It is just that I have no choice. You should know the reason behind the two disasters in Huangnam County, Qing Rongguan and Lian Tang. If you get close to me, the general of Lingzhou, you will have a high position and a good salary, but there will also be many hidden dangers. So, remember to remind Miss Song that you can go out of the city in the future, but it is best not to be too secretive. I am afraid that the Peregrine Eagle Guard in Lingzhou City will not be able to stop some disasters if they are careless. Of course, generally speaking, Lingzhou City is already very clean. I'm just afraid of what might happen because for many things, as long as there's a what if, then everything will be gone." Song Yan clasped his hands and bowed. His tone was solemn and emotional as he said, "Since your Highness loves the Song family so much, I will definitely do my best to assist the provincial governor to help your Highness solve your problems and bring benefits to the people of Lingzhou." Su Fengnian nodded his head. When Song Yan raised his head, he asked with a smile, "Miss Song went to meet with her friends next door?" Song Yan was in his own territory, Huangnam County, and could still put on some airs in front of His Royal Highness. At this moment, he did not have any arrogance and replied respectfully, "Your Highness is wise." Su Fengnian had a helpless expression as he joked, Song Bi, you have only been in Lingzhou City for a few hours and you are already willing to be my servant. Can't you have a bit of the demeanor of a famous scholar?" Song Yan had a natural expression as he smiled leisurely. "If there is a day when provincial governor is promoted again, when I successfully take over, I will definitely have to bow and bend my knees a little more." Su Fengnian gave a gratified smile. "That's right. This is the Lingzhou Bi that I want." Su Beiji also cupped his fists and said, "In the future, I will have to trouble Song Bi." Song Yan quickly returned the greeting. "Of course." After saying their goodbyes, Su Fengnian and Su Beiji continued to stroll around the residence. Su Fengnian said softly, "Right now the Lingzhou officials are looking at you, Su Juzi, just like how they looked at me, the Lingzhou general. Maybe you are even more pitiful. After all, I am the legitimate Bailiang, His Royal Highness. On the other hand, you are an untrustworthy northern barbarian. If it was not for this, I would not have helped you find so many people. Persimmon, Juzi, we are in the same boat. Luckily, I can leave immediately. If you find it difficult to move forward in Lingzhou, I won't care about you." Su Beiji suddenly said, "Actually, you can just put Sun Yin in the position of provincial governor of Lingzhou." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Let's not talk about first come first serve. Just based on our relationship, there is no reason for him to take your position. If you do not take the position of provincial governor of Lingzhou, it is even more impossible for you to take the position of provincial governor of Beiliang. In the future, how can you become the second provincial governor of Beiliang in the fastest speed? Sun Yin's current future is a win-win situation for both of us. Su Beiji said softly. Have you heard of a saying? Su Fengnian nodded doubtfully. Su Beiji sighed and said, the ancient said that extreme wisdom will be hurt, deep love will not live long. In the end you have both of them. Su Fengnian casually put his arm around Su Beiji's shoulder and laughed heartily. The ancients also said that good people do not live long, scourges live for thousands of years. What are you afraid of? Su Beiji smiled. Su Fengnian was surprised and said, Juzi, this is the first time you have praised me. No, I have to go to the firecrackers to celebrate. Su Beiji broke free from Su Fengnian's arm and said angrily, get lost. His Highness really did run away like a wisp of smoke. After Su Fengnian met Li Gongda on the night of the 4th day of the first month, he never went to the study again. He did not allow anyone to enter either. Even Huyen Guanyin, who looked at the impatiens outside the window every day, was not an exception. In front of Su Beiji, Su Fengnian walked out of the study alone. With a serious expression, he pushed open the door. That secret letter was placed on the table, unopened. Su Fengnian's face twisted with pain and malevolence, but then he forcefully smoothed it out. He moved over a chair and sat down, facing the letter. His Royal Highness remained silent. He had agreed with Li Shifeng that he would originally enter the city on the 3rd day of the first month, but in the end, it was delayed until the 4th. He wanted Li Gongda to see the secret letter personally written by the imperial court's Zhang Julu. He wanted Li Gongda to feel his conscience and choose to stay in Beiliang after a day of hesitation between the imperial court and Beiliang. Later on, Su Fengnian soft-heartedly said 3 secret letters, one each for Su Xiao, Chu Lushan, and Huang Fu Cheng. He added the extra word, 3, so that Li Gongda, who had secretly hidden a secret letter from Grand Secretary Zhang, could rein in himself before the precipice. However, this Uncle Li, who Beiliang had never treated unfairly, still didn't change his mind. Just like that, he walked out of the general's mansion's main entrance. As for why Li Gongda drew legs on a snake, saying that Li Hanlin had been lured to Beiliang's southern court, creating unexpected complications, Su Fengnian was at first a bit bewildered and confused. However, soon afterwards, the secret letter from the spy at the border explained everything. He, Su Fengnian, schemed against the imperial court, schemed against Zhao Guo, schemed against Zhang Julu, Huan Wen, but when had the other party ever been soft-hearted, pushing the boat with the current? Instead, he caught Beiliang unprepared. Even many of the southern court's great spies from Liang surfaced, one of them even becoming a military officer in charge of 3,000 soldiers in the southern court, all for the sake of successfully bringing Li Hanlin to the capital. If not for Su Yanbing urgently rushing to Yuzhou to support Huang Fu Cheng, Su Fengnian might really have picked up a rock and smashed it on his own foot. Su Fengnian stared blankly at the dust-covered secret letter. Was Beiliang so unpopular? Su Fengnian abruptly stood up, his chair instantly breaking into pieces. He said angrily, Li Gongda, are you so greedy? Han Laozhan, who had heard the commotion, was just about to barge into the study, but he immediately stopped when he heard this question. Su Fengnian laughed darkly in a low voice. Who doesn't want to be the emperor? Who doesn't want to be the emperor? Who doesn't want to be a rank 1 official, second only to one person and above tens of thousands of people? If not for you, Su Fengnian, seeking trouble for yourself, even if Li Gongda wanted to rebel against Beiliang, he would have to wait until Su Xiao was dead before the golden thread weaver Li Shifeng dared to make a move. Su Fengnian took a step forward, clutching the secret letter tightly. It was crumpled in his hands. All of a sudden, Su Fengnian's eyes widened, his face filled with disbelief. The seals of the 2 secret letters were different in weight. This one was clearly the so-called true secret letter. Li Gongda should have handed over the secret letter with the light seal. Su Fengnian rushed out of the study, left the corridor, and rushed toward the administrator's residence. He directly jumped over the towering wall between the 2 large residences. He landed lightly in the Li residence's garden. When they saw the 2 figures in the air, the 2 women were scared out of their wits. Su Fengnian calmly asked, Where is Uncle Li? Of the 2 women, Li Fuzhen opened her mouth wide and did not come back to her senses. On the other hand, Song Huangmei, who had been practicing martial arts since she was young, had a look of longing and reverence on her face. She swallowed her saliva and said with a smile, "Your Highness, Sister Li and I just drank a pot of spring spirit tea with the administrator. He said he was going to the study to read." Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. Then, he left in a flash. After Song Huangmei recovered from her shock, she jumped up and grabbed onto Li Fujian's sleeves, saying excitedly, "Look, look, Sister Fujian, I told you His Royal Highness is a top expert filled with killing intent. He must have killed many people, but you didn't believe me. Now you believe me, right? With His Highness's mysterious movement technique, one wouldn't be able to use it without being at Master Realm. I think that the rumor that His Royal Highness personally killed the 5th raccoon of the Bing-carrying mountain is true. Before I get chased out of the general's residence, I have to go and learn from His Highness. Even if I have to serve him tea, I am willing to do so." Compared to Song Huangmei's excitement, Li Fujian lowered her eyes and was dejected. Chapter 943. Hearing the knock on the door, the administrator, who had been flipping through a book from the previous dynasty, raised his head and gently put down the book. He straightened his clothes and said calmly, "Come in." The familiar figure pushed open the door and entered. He said to Li Gongda, "The general of Lingzhou greets the administrator." Li Gongda's expression was complicated. This second-level official, who was known for his skill in flattery, rose and said in a low voice, "His Royal Highness came at the right time, but he came later than Li Gongda expected. The reason he said this is because the matter of the 2 secret letters was indeed secretly planned by His Highness. Bailiang needs this kind of king of Bailiang, so he said. He came at the right time. He came late because he was dissatisfied with His Highness' soft-heartedness." After Li Gongda handed over a secret letter, he didn't immediately turn hostile and didn't immediately open the letter. He knew that the secret letter was the real one. This means that His Highness has been hesitant these days. Even if he mistakenly believes that Li Gongda has decided to join the court, he still doesn't want to kill him. His Royal Highness like this is more than enough to be the general of Lingzhou or the provincial governor of Lingzhou. If he is merciful, how will he command the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry that are the best in the world? Su Fengnian didn't refute this. Li Gongda smiled and brought out 2 chairs. The 2 of them sat across from each other. The administrator, who was very different from usual, looked at this young face that was becoming more and more angular. He sighed softly and said, "His Highness, you might ask why Li Gongda did this. Since he clearly didn't join the court and wasn't tempted by Zhang Julu, why did he deliberately hide a fake letter? It's very simple. His Highness carefully planned this time and almost passed off the fake as the real one. He wanted to test Li Gongda, the head of the civil officials in Bailiang. Li Gongda also wanted to know whether it was wise for him to stay in Bailiang. Your Highness." At this point, Li Gongda stopped talking. Unlike the previous time in the study, this time, tears flowed from the bottom of his heart. Li Gongda did not wipe them away and slowly said, "Your Highness has come late, which means that Your Highness is not an ambitious and ruthless person who would kill anyone for your own achievements." Li Gongda felt regret in his heart, but he was even more grateful. I had entrusted Hanlin to such a king of Bailiang. Even if he really died on the battlefield one day, Li Gongda would grit his teeth and not have half a word of complaint. Li Gongda had been an official for 30 years, but he had never seen anyone who was truly heartless. In the end, they did not suffer from evil retribution. Even if they were honored before their death, it would be a disaster for their descendants. If the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. His Highness's methods were sinister, but he did not lose his kindness and mellow heart. He was exactly the same as the general. This was the new King Liang that Li Gongda truly wanted. To be honest, Your Highness might not believe it. It was not that Li Gongda was cunning and saw through Your Highness's plan at a glance. It was because Li Gongda believed that the general's son would not treat the Li family unfairly and would not let Hanlin down. That was why he never thought of going to the court to be some bullshit first-rank official. If I went to the capital, Hanlin would break off all relations with me and my son, and would not recognize me as a father for the rest of my life. His schemes were all for the good of his descendants. His son was gone, and Li Gongda was already in his 50s. He had become a powerful official in the court. He would be in his coffin in a few years. What was the use of a posthumous title? Besides, how could being an official in the unfamiliar capital compare to being the administrator of Bailiang? Li Gongda had spent his entire life pondering the path of an official and studying the art of climbing up the ranks. As the old saying goes, ginger is destined to be spicier with age. I will not make such a big mistake at this age. Your Highness, don't worry. Li Gongda will never mention the secret letter to Hanlin. Your Highness has a clear conscience towards Northern Liang regarding this matter, and you shouldn't create a rift with Han Lin over this matter. Just treat it as Li Gongda's sincere request to Your Highness to prevent Han Lin from going down a dead end. Your Highness, when the time comes, Han Lin can only die at the border. If Your Highness has a guilty conscience towards Han Lin alone, Li Gongda also asks Your Highness to consider Han Lin and not speak of this matter. Li Gongda, who had never knelt before Su Fengnian, slowly knelt down and said in a low voice, "If Your Highness does not agree, Li Gongda will resign as the administrator." Su Fengnian handed the secret letter to the administrator and said calmly, "Uncle Li, Su Fengnian promises you one thing. If I have the chance to tell my descendants my last words in the future, I promise that as long as the Su family is prosperous, regardless of whether the descendants of the Li family are loyal to the Su family, even if they commit treason, I will ensure the safety of the Li family. The Su family will not kill anyone." Li Gongda's body trembled. He lowered his head and said with a choked voice, "This old official thanks Your Highness for your kindness." At the door, Li Fuzhen saw the scene of his father kneeling and screamed, "Su Fengnian, what are you doing?" Li Gongda, who was being helped up by His Royal Highness, shouted, Don't be rude." Su Fengnian smiled, "Uncle Li, I want to apologize to you. From today onwards, Su Beiji will be the provincial governor of Lingzhou." Li Gongda wiped his face and chuckled, "This is not a big deal. It's not worth Your Highness to tell me personally. Also, Hanlin has safely returned to Yuzhou." Su Fengnian said this in a low voice and left, brushing past Li Fuzhen. Li Gongda, who was overjoyed, carefully hid the secret letter and stared at his daughter. "You don't know the severity of the matter." Li Fuzhen said angrily, "Father, you are the administrator of Beiliang. You kneeled to Uncle Su and flattered him. When did I say anything? But Su Fengnian is just a general of Lingzhou. He is not even the hereditary king of Beiliang and he wants you to kneel. What right does he have? He calls you Uncle Li and it sounds nice, but when has he ever treated you as an elder?" Li Gongda narrowed his eyes and stared at his daughter. He smiled. "What right does he have? Just because His Royal Highness is stirring up trouble in Lingzhou. He has already made me, the administrator, unable to make ends meet and flustered. Just because he dared to take down Zhong Honggu in the Beiliang army and not pick on a soft persimmon to become a laughingstock. Just because he has lived until today." Li Gongda saw that his daughter's face was covered in tears and his heart ached. He lowered his voice and walked in front of her to help her wipe her tears. Li Fuzhen turned her head to avoid him. The administrator sighed. "How could I not know? He never treated me as an elder in the past. Besides, I also never treated him as His Royal Highness. However, it will be different in the future. Don't be angry with your father. The stupidest thing a woman can do in the world is to be angry." Li Gongda seemed to feel that his words were too harsh and laughed softly. Today is a double blessing for the Li family. It is even happier than when I became the administrator. Want to have a drink with me?" Li Fuzhen was silent. The old fox Li Gongda said casually, "I recently found out about the details of His Highness going to Beimang. Sigh, it is a pity that child Hanlin is not here. I have no one to talk to. Why don't you listen to me? Otherwise, it would be boring for me to drink alone." Li Fuzhen made a sound of acknowledgement. Sir Zhou returned home. When he got off the carriage, his face was still glowing. Zhou Jianshu's son, whose white-hoofed shadow had been slapped to death by His Royal Highness, Zhou Congwen, was afraid that something bad had happened to his father in the general's manor. He waited at the door for an hour. When he saw his father's happy face, his heart that was in his throat finally relaxed. He was about to ask when Zhou Jianshu smiled and said, "Let's go back to the manor and talk." After the father and son sat down, they waved their hands to disperse a few beautiful servants who were good at serving them. Zhou Jianshu tugged at the collar of his official robe. Zhou Congwen hurriedly asked, "Father, what did that person say after entering the manor? Will our Zhou family be hated?" Chapter 944. Zhou Jianshu frowned, but since it was just the two of them talking in secret, he was too lazy to argue with his son about how His Royal Highness was addressed. He said slowly, "Why are you so impatient? What did I tell you in the past? Only by smiling and talking calmly can you achieve big things and become an official. I won't keep you in suspense. The Lingzhou General's manor has no intention of pursuing the matter of Wanquan Street. His Highness has a big plan and doesn't have the time to fight with these soldiers who don't know what's good for them. During the banquet, His Highness pushed out Huangnam County's Song Yan and Longqing County's Su Beiji to become the Lingzhou Provincial Governor and Lingzhou Provincial Governor. This is a good thing and a bad thing. Let me test you. Tell me what is good and bad about it? Zhou Congwen, who was not unfamiliar with the conflicts in the officialdom, began to think carefully. After a long silence, he said, "The good thing is that father is one of the first officials to enter the general's official residence. The new provincial governor and His Excellency are not looking at the monk's face, but at the Buddha's face. If they want to take control of father's position in Lingzhou, they have to consider His Highness' eyes." The bad thing was that His Highness did not settle the score with Dong Yueqi and that group of old men. Then, their positions were temporarily stable. The connections that father had built up in the Lingzhou military, according to father's instructions, most of the captains had been hiding like turtles. It seemed like they did not have a chance to take advantage of the situation to rise up. I'm afraid that I will have to make up for it to appease them. At the very least, it will be a few hundred to 1,000 taels of silver. We have received quite a lot of gifts this new year, but we have already given out 70 to 80% of it. With that, our family has no income at all. Ever since I became an official, this is the first time that I haven't earned any money. Zhou Jianshu twirled his beard and smiled. Not bad, not bad. I have never cared about money. As long as I continue to be an official, I will get what I need. A lot of idiots, even if their family background isn't thin, once they see shining silver, it's like a hungry man seeing a beautiful woman. If they eat too badly, it's tantamount to neglecting the essentials and chasing after the trifles. They won't go far in the officialdom. Zhou Congwen mocked angrily. That Dong Yueqi and the other two are really funny. That person just said one sentence and one knelt, one cried, and one was beaten. This bunch of uneducated general seeds don't think they are embarrassing. However, at least they know how to act according to the wind, but they are too stiff. They are not as simple as you are, father. Lord Zhou, who was flattered by his son, smiled even more brightly. The corner of his mouth curled up. These people rely on the military merits they have accumulated to be arrogant. Don't look at how I am friendly with them in the past. In fact, I don't think I have any respect for them. Let's not talk about others. Just that military officer, Huang Zhong, until today, I only know the 10 words in his name. Can this old man manage Lingzhou's political affairs well? He has 4 sons and a bunch of grandsons, but none of them are promising. They bully men and women and do all kinds of evil. Most importantly, it is fine if they do bad things, but they do it so openly. Aren't they stretching their necks and begging the Su family to chop off their heads? Luckily, His Highness still remembers their old relationship and is too lazy to bother about it. If it was any other master, they would have already chopped off their heads and made them into candied haws to show their might. Zhou Congwen sneered. This Lingzhou general is too soft-hearted. If it was me, I would have already killed the chicken to warn the monkey in Lingzhou. I would have killed a few hundred people from his family. Anyway, they are all people who deserve to die. When that time comes, the entire city will be frightened and no one will be convinced. I can also make a good name for myself among the ignorant people. Zhou Jianshu laughed heartily before retracting his smile. He said solemnly, during this period of time, don't show your face outside the manor. His Highness is about to leave Lingzhou. When you meet up with those family members, remember, you are only allowed to say good things about His Highness. If anyone refutes you, you will fall out with them on the spot. Zhou Congwen hesitated for a moment, then said with a smile, I'll listen to you, father. Those generals who call me brothers might still be useful in the past, but in the future, they won't be worth much. Sooner or later, I'll fall out with them. Zhou Jianshu's face was filled with gratification. Dong Manor. Dong Yueqi, who had lost all face on Wanquan Street, closed the door and refused to see any guests. Dong Zhan watched as her father, who could talk and laugh in front of General Zhong, became depressed. He put on his clothes and no longer exposed his chest and back. However, he continued to stare blankly at the Yueqi military officer's armor. Dong Zhan tried to persuade her father to eat a few times, but he did not listen. She could only heat up the food again and again. Dong Zhan, who was originally a little stubborn and did not want to admit her mistakes, cried as she knelt at her father's feet. Dong Hongqiu sighed heavily and reached out his right hand that was covered in calluses and scars. Back then, even when he slept, he had to hug the Baelyong blade with both hands to sleep peacefully. Dong Hongqiu rubbed his daughter's head and said softly, "Do you think that 600 old soldiers sent His Royal Highness out of Baelyong and into the capital because I was blind? I just did not want to admit it. Do you think that I would not believe the rumors that His Royal Highness went to Baymang alone? I just did not want to believe it. Not only Ling Zhou, but the entire Baelyong is the same with all the old generals and officials like me. However, when I knelt today, I was still not kneeling to the young prince. I was kneeling to the general and to the Baelyong soldiers who died in battle. If I did not take off my armor today, even I would have forgotten how many scars and arrow wounds I have. Do you still remember what I told you in the past? The reason why I joined the army and risked my life to fight with my life on the line was not because I had nothing better to do. Father's ancestors were all officials, and their ranks were not low. Your great-grandfather was a deputy imperial censor of Northern Han, and your grandfather was a county magistrate. They were all upright officials with a good reputation. Afterwards, your entire family was killed by bandits who took advantage of the turmoil in the country. Their eyes were red from the killing, and they killed every official they saw. They did not care if the official was good or bad, as if they were good people as long as they killed the official. When I first joined the army, I only felt that there was hope in joining the Sioux family's army, with its strict military laws and strict rewards and punishments. By killing more bandits who willfully slaughter the innocent, not only would I be able to take revenge, I might even be able to restore the Dong family's name to the annals of history. Perhaps there are some things that I have never told you. In the past, I felt that there was no need. As a girl, even the general said that children should be raised in poverty, and daughters should be raised in wealth. Since you have an official as a father, you should be born to enjoy a life of prosperity. Father will not nag at you about those things. Only after today's unforeseen event did I realize that I was wrong. When I was young, the family rules were still in place. When I was young, I knew to look down on those children of influential families who used their power to bully others. Why is it that, in the blink of an eye, my own daughter has become someone that I dislike? Do you remember Meng Ya, who grew up in our family? She is your Uncle Meng's orphan. Originally, they were betrothed when we were little. However, you were unwilling no matter what, disliking that he did not have a scholarly rank or a family background. Even if I had to betray you, I would accept it for you. Back then, if it wasn't for your Uncle Meng blocking the stab in the back for me at the western Shu Chunshan Pass, it would have been you living under someone else's roof for 20 years. I'm not saying this to persuade you to marry Meng Ya. I just want to tell you that before Uncle Meng, who was born in the marketplace, died, he often told me that if he became an official in the future, he had to be a good official who would not bully the commoners. Whoever dared to commit crimes in his territory, he would kill them all on sight. If the general did not agree, he would even dare to scold the general. Once, he was bragging with father and his old subordinates and was caught red-handed by the general who was patrolling the military camp. At that time, your Uncle Meng was still a junior military officer. He was so scared that he almost peed his pants. Guess what? Not only did the general not teach this junior military officer who had a big mouth and a heart higher than the sky a lesson, he even squatted down to chat with us about daily life. He said that when your Uncle Meng became an official in the future, he would definitely be a good official. The general even said that he could not bear to scold him. Tell me, how did your father become someone who would definitely be the first bastard he would kill as long as your Uncle Meng was alive? Dong Zhan, who was used to being arrogant and unruly in Lingzhou, could only cry. It was as if the sky had collapsed as she sobbed uncontrollably. Dong Hongqiu walked in front of the old and mottled armor. His gaze was desolate as he said in a low voice, "Zhener, don't cry. Father will bring you to that cenotaph. Give Uncle Meng a few toasts of wine. If father remembers correctly, after you were 11 years old, you never went there again. All these years, you looked down on Meng Ya. How did he look up to you?" Chapter 945. When Su Fengnian returned to the mansion, he did not climb over the wall again. This greatly disappointed Song Huangmei, who had been waiting at the foot of the wall. It was very late when she learned from the steward that His Royal Highness walked out of the mansion step by step. Miss Song exclaimed and ran out of the Li mansion. The steward saw this and muttered to himself. This Miss Song was too rash. Compared to the quiet and virtuous Miss of the Li mansion, she was thousands of miles away. The steward then began to daydream. Everyone in Baelyong knew that Master Hanlin and His Royal Highness were brothers who grew up together. If Miss Song could become the consort of the King of Baelyong in the future, in addition to the fact that Master was already the administrator, then the Lee family would be worthy of the title of the most powerful family in Baelyong. The old steward shook his head. Alas, it was a pity that Miss Song was fooling around with that Guadahan disciple. A peony flower stuck in cow dung. Su Fengnian lay on the bench in the pavilion and looked up at the starry sky. He turned a blind eye to the girl who had sneaked into the pavilion. The girl was really a hard-working heroine. She was able to control her temper. She gritted her teeth and endured the cold for an hour without making a sound. Su Fengnian sat up and asked with a smile, "Miss Song, do you need something from me?" Song Huang Mei, who had shrunk to the side of the pavilion to avoid the cold, jumped in fright. Her face, which was not too beautiful, turned red. She lowered her head and clutched the corner of her clothes. She no longer had the heroine demeanor that she had when she blocked him with her sword at the governor's mansion in Huangnam County. Su Fengnian did not want to embarrass her. He took the initiative to ask, "How many years have you practiced the sword? Do you want me to teach you a few easy sword moves?" After Su Fengnian asked the question, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. The girl stared at him in a daze and muttered to herself. She seemed to be saying that His Royal Highness's eyes were better than someone else's, but she still only liked that guy. Su Fengnian coughed heavily. Song Huangmei sat down on the other side of the bench and hugged her shoulders with both hands to ward off the cold. She quickly regained her original straightforward personality and laughed. "Your Highness, I know you are an expert and a good person. I have someone I like. He is an outer disciple of a gang in Huangnam County. His name is Do Yongguan. His biggest wish in life is to wear a Baelyong saber and marry me. But my father does not seem to like him very much. How about your Highness be merciful and casually give that Do Yongguan a saber? My father will definitely not object." Su Fengnian knew that this girl definitely did not know that Lotus Pond was almost completely wiped out from Lingzhou's Jianghu. However, the spy report did mention that a young man named Do Yongguan had escaped. He was the lover of Song Yan's daughter, Song Huangmei. Not only that, all 18 generations of Do Yongguan's ancestors had been thoroughly investigated. Su Fengnian had given instructions at the time for the Eagle Guard to give up on this person. An outer disciple who had just entered Lotus Pond for a few days could be killed or not. Since he had this relationship with the Song family, he could just treat it as a gift for Governor Song when he became a Lingzhou official. As for whether that young man would bear a grudge against Baelyong after escaping this disaster and whether he would be determined to take revenge for his sect, Su Fengnian did not care. In the entire Liang Jianghu, there were not many people like that young master who waved a folding fan who had the ability to kill his way to Su Fengnian's eyes. There were even more people who died without even seeing His Royal Highness once. If that person was able to rise above the rest and make Su Fengnian see his name in the spy report again, to the extent where Su Fengnian didn't even mind letting him know about Liantong Zhangsu's identity as a Northern Mang spy and then sending him to the border to sharpen himself. Since he wanted to touch a blade, after he entered the army, he would be able to touch it until he wanted to vomit. However, people's hearts were hard to predict. Only heaven knew which path this Do kid would choose to take. As for whether or not Do Yongguan and Song Huangmei could be married, that was even less of a concern to Su Fengnian. Even if he did not want to, he could not. In the current Baelyong, His Royal Highness's time was perhaps the most valuable. Su Fengnian collected his thoughts and smiled. Private individuals are not allowed to wear Baelyong knives. Besides, with your father's eyesight, how could he not see the authenticity of Do Yongguan's knife? Chapter 946. Song Huangmei had a happy-go-lucky personality. Hearing His Royal Highness say this, she only had an expression of understanding. She made an "oh" sound and did not insist. In reality, if it were a normal, slightly unscrupulous woman, if she had the chance to be alone with His Royal Highness, she would do everything in her power to make herself gorgeously dressed. If she caught His Royal Highness, she would rather kill the wrong person than let the wrong person go. Otherwise, she would use her identity as a woman to pester His Royal Highness for some promises. This was probably the reason why Su Fengnian was willing to casually chat with her. Song Huangmei did not disturb His Royal Highness, but she also did not leave. She sat on the bench and lazily leaned against the pillar, looking up at the starry sky. Su Fengnian was experienced and knew that this girl most likely missed the disciple of the Jianghu with the surname Do. He lay down again and closed his eyes to rest. In his mind, he carefully calculated the ending of Lingzhou. The officialdom of Lingzhou, which was originally far more complicated than Yuan Liang, was believed that with Su Beiji's ability, even if there were still some restrictions, he would be able to barely open up the situation. It was about time for him to leave. He could not always wear the official hat of Lingzhou's general and occupy this place. However, if he really wanted to leave, he had to first take care of that young ace who dared to intrude. Su Fengnian, who had closed his ears, sensed that after Song Huangmei stood up, she tiptoed away. He smiled gently and waited for her to walk far away. He snapped his fingers and said to the death soldier who had quietly appeared, "Tell Lingzhou's Yu son to do something and polish Do Yongguan. If this person is too unyielding, remove some of his edges and corners. If his will is already depressed, let him meet a noble person. Don't let him lose his spirit early." The death soldier was about to leave when he suddenly heard His Royal Highness ask with a smile, "How about I go and meet that peach blossom fan myself?" In the chaotic times of the spring and autumn period, many people fled far away to avoid disaster. In order to settle down, they did not hesitate to change their names. As a result, when the court set up a list of the names of the people under heaven, they knew that there were many new names that were unclear. However, there were not many people like His Royal Highness who did not even have a name. This man who seemed to have no past and no future, as always, did not say a single word. Su Fengnian waved his hand, and the death soldier disappeared in a flash. Su Fengnian, who still did not feel sleepy, strolled along the small path, counting the lanterns along the way. He guessed that after Li Shifeng stepped down, the court would agree to let Wang Lufting take over the position of Golden Thread Weaving Bureau. Because once this opening was opened, the Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, and the powerful King of Yanqi and the arrogant King of Guangling would probably be willing to borrow the east wind of Bailiang to pull out this thorn in the flesh. Thinking of this, Su Fengnian smiled and said, "What thorn in the flesh? It's more like a thorn in the flesh." Walking to the north side of the official residence near the lake, he was surprised to find that Song Yan, who had just become the king of Lingzhou, was sitting on a rock by the lake. It was a large object that had been moved from the lake of the spring deity to the Bailiang Road. The cultured and famous people in Liang favored the huge rocks that were pulled out from the lake of the spring deity. Furthermore, even the most ordinary of rocks weighed a few thousand pounds. To be moved hundreds or thousands of li, even if it was not expensive, it would still be expensive. Song Yan's attitude was relaxed. One leg was straight, the other bent, and he drank mouthful after mouthful of Jiannan Chun, which was said to be able to burn through the intestines and lungs. When Su Fengnian walked to the huge rock, Sir Song finally came back to his senses. When he wanted to stand up and greet him, His Royal Highness had already sat down cross-legged. It was not appropriate for him to stand up. Song Yan roughly understood the temperament of the Lingzhou general beside him. He did not bother to make a scene. He shook the yellow clay wine jar and only smiled and said, "Your Highness, it's bottomed out." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "What bottomed out? There are clearly 2 mouthfuls of wine left. If you can't bear to part with it, just say so." Song Yan was also honest. He laughed and said, "I really can't bear to part with it. This jar of wine has been buried underground for 7 or 8 years. At that time, 3 jars were placed underground. After Lord Li became the administrator, he drank 1 jar. This time, when he came to Lingzhou, he knew that he was going to be promoted and get rich. Plus, he had to leave Huangnan County, so he wanted to bring the remaining 2 jars here and give one to Your Highness despite the pain. Unexpectedly, when I went to the backyard to take a look, there was only the jar in my hand left. After thinking about it, I knew that my daughter, who sided with an outsider, stole it and gave it to someone else. This made me so worried that I had a few more strands of white hair. Your Highness, please don't blame me." Su Fengnian joked. "The reason has been taken by Sir Song. What else can I say?" Song Yan sighed with emotion. "Your Highness hasn't had it easy these past few years." Su Fengnian was silent for a moment. He waited for Song Biejia to raise his head and drink a big mouthful of wine before he laughed softly. "You might not believe it, but I went to Beimang to meet the king of the northern courtyard, Zhao Huainan. I also went to the capital to meet the emperor. There were many twists and turns in between these 2 trips. However, the one time I felt the most wronged was the first time I left home in a sorry state. In Hezhou, I met a son of a rich family who was carrying a Bailiang saber that he had bought privately. That fellow knocked a big bump on my head. If I was in Bailiang back then, This kind of trash would have been bitten to death by dogs. It was also at that time that I realized that there was a world of difference between having Su Xiao as a father and not having a father like him by my side. Later on, I also suffered some losses. However, it was probably because I was used to being treated like a rat on the street, so it was no longer difficult for me to get over it. At that time, I found some fugitives to be my training dummies. The horse bandit leader slashed my body with his saber. The pain was so excruciating that I almost rolled on the ground. At that time, I did not have the courage to lower my head to look at the wound. When I uncovered the scar, I told myself not to practice the saber anymore. Fortunately, I clenched my teeth and persevered. Since then, I have never been able to forget it. Even though my life has been hanging by a thread many times over the past few years, which was indeed a torment of hovering between life and death, I still feel that it is not as memorable as that stab. Song Yen was startled. He raised his hand and lifted the wine jar. He sighed and said, "This lowly official has never been afraid of the intrigues of the officialdom. However, if someone put a saber on his neck and really had to watch himself bleed, he would most likely not care about the integrity of a scholar." The phrase "without the strength to truss a chicken" refers to scholars like Song Yen. Su Fengnian joked, "No man can be without the strength to truss a chicken. Some brothel girls are even better at trussing chickens." Song Yen spat out a mouthful of wine. He lowered his head and looked at his crotch. He laughed until tears came out. He did not care about wasting the last bottle of Jian Nan Chunyan. After laughing, Song Yen turned his head to look at His Royal Highness. "Life is not as you wish. It is a bitter thing." Su Fengnian looked at the lake and smiled indifferently. "In the end I can still talk with people. It is a fortunate thing." Song Yen was silent. Su Fengnian said, "Song Yen, go and bury 3 more jars of wine. In 7 or 8 years, if both of us are alive, you will give me a jar. I will also give you a border official who is not inferior to the administrator." Chapter 947. His Royal Highness, who had just stabilized his position as Lingzhou's general, left. The entire city was in an uproar. This made the provincial officials whose ranks were lower than Zhou Fulu's stand outside the general's residence and look at each other. They were extremely vexed. These officials really had a stomach full of bitterness of not being able to find a temple to worship Bodhisattva. Fortunately, there was still a Lingzhou provincial governor and a guest temporarily living in the general's residence. It was a pity that the new provincial governor, Su Beiji, had put on airs in broad daylight and refused to see any guests. Only a few scattered officials who had waited bitterly until dusk refused to give up. They were told by the residence's head steward, Sun Fulu, that they could enter the residence for a chat. This made these people excited like they had been injected with chicken blood. They all felt that the ancient saying, "Where there is sincerity, metal and stone will open," was true. However, there was only one congratulatory gift in their hands. Once the master of the general's residence left, even though the provincial governor's rank was a full rank lower, he was a local snake. They really did not dare to slight him. Fortunately, the young provincial governor was understanding and waited outside the hall with the guest, Song Yen, for everyone, giving them enough face. The congratulatory gift was naturally given to His Royal Highness who had already left the provincial capital. That provincial governor Su was truly worthy of being His Royal Highness's most trusted aide. He joked that when he had a provincial governor's residence, he would ask for a gift from everyone and would not be lenient. Everyone looked at the calm and reserved Su Beiji and felt like they had eaten a large calming pill. As long as this person did not use His Royal Highness' power to start a massacre in Lingzhou and followed the rules to become an official, then everything would be fine. Right now, no one dared to cause trouble. Since everyone had accepted their fate and submitted to His Royal Highness, then they had a way out. They did not need to worry about being the first to be cut. They could go help the new master of Lingzhou pass firewood and make the flames burn a little higher. They saw that Provincial Governor Su and Song Biejia did not seem to be united on the surface but divided at heart. They spoke many times and seemed to have a tacit understanding. This made everyone feel fear. Even though they did not know what Administrator Li Gongda's plans were, as long as these two worked together for a period of time, even if they were newlyweds, they would still be separated. However, if Surly wanted to stir up trouble at this juncture, the general's residence would at least be able to put up a fight at the very least. They would not be completely helpless. As for the situation in Lingzhou, that was a matter for the future. The group of 5th, 6th, and 7th rank officials would just deal with it as they saw it. After sending off this group of guests, Song Yen raised his head to look at the sky. He smiled and said, "Provincial Governor, looking at the situation, it is going to snow again. Let's drink a little wine and wait for the snow together?" Su Beiji shook his head and said with a smile, "I just handed over the matters in Lingzhou to the neighboring side. It is a mess and there is not enough manpower in the residence. I am someone who cannot sit still, so I will not drink wine and admire the snow with Sir Song. If there is really a day when we are free, we will make up for it together. At that time, Sir Song will not be able to escape even if you want to." Song Yen smiled and nodded. Looking at Provincial Governor Su Beiji's lonely back, he thought to himself, is Su Beiji going to be like Zhao Yuling in the Liang Temple, a lonely official who is favored by both civil and military officials? Su Fengnian left the capital of Lingzhou and had already arrived in Green Snake County. He did not travel in secret this time. Instead, he brought along 600 Lingzhou elites. The number of captains with real power in Lingzhou could be counted on one hand. For example, the Yu cavalry captain Dong Hongqiu was Zhong Hongwu's trusted aide, so it was not easy for him to move around. However, in such a large granary of Beiliang, it was impossible for Zhong Hongwu to cover the sky with one hand. The wooden man beside Su Fengnian was named Huang Xiaokuai. After his father died, he made an exception and inherited the position of captains with real power. It was a rare title, Pearl Captain. It originated from the war during the spring and autumn period. After Huang Xiaokuai's father broke through the city, he strung up thousands of heads with ropes and hung them all over the city walls like bloody pearl curtains. This was to welcome the enemy's reinforcements and to show the enemy that he was willing to fight to the death. Later on, he even performed meritorious service in defending the city. He was promised by Su Shao that no matter what rank he was, as long as he was an officer under the Su family's iron cavalry, his descendants would be able to inherit his meritorious service. As expected, Huang Xiaokuai successfully took over the position of Pearl Captain 2 years ago. However, he was always pushed aside and isolated in Lingzhou. He was the weakest of the captains with real power. After Su Fengnian chatted with Huang Xiaokuai for a while, he knew that there was a reason why Huang Xiaokuai was not popular in Lingzhou. Huang Xiaokuai was too stubborn and did not know how to adapt. Even when he saw him, a person who had resigned from the position of Lingzhou general and was still a member of His Royal Highness, Huang Xiaokuai was still the same. Compared to Wang Ji, who was also a descendant of meritorious service, the difference was like heaven and earth. However, Huang Xiaokuai did not know how to curry favor and only knew how to manage the army. This made Su Fengnian admire him from the bottom of his heart. In Lingzhou, he had seen many slippery and two-faced officials. When he saw Huang Xiaokuai, it was as if he had tasted table after table of greasy delicacies and suddenly brought a bowl of refreshing white porridge. The 600 cavalrymen galloped east on the relay road. During this time, there were constantly spies and scouts reporting back with military intelligence. Even Huang Xiaokuai, who was a rigid military officer who did not know how to climb up the ranks of the bureaucracy, was surprised. It turned out that not only were the 600 cavalrymen under his command rushing to the border between Green Snake County and Eastern Wind County to await orders, there were also a few troops from other counties who had heard the news. It seemed like they were going to spread a net to surround the master and servant pair. Using several thousand troops to deal with 2 people, wasn't His Highness a little too much? However, Huang Xiaokuai did not dare to comment on this. He originally thought that it would be difficult for His Highness to do anything alone in Lingzhou. Who would have thought that with one palm, the entire bureaucracy of Lingzhou was lying on the ground, not daring to even breathe loudly. Huang Xiaokuai, who had never had much talent in the bureaucracy, admired him even more. Behind Su Fengnian was the Lingzhou Deputy General Han Laozhan. In the cavalry, there was a carriage. Huyen Guanyin had already been sent to the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. Only Pei Nanwei, who was still wandering around, was left. From time to time, she would lift up the curtain and look at the person galloping forward. Pei Nanwei's eyes were gloomy. If this was 3 years ago, when the Crown Prince of Beiliang made such a big fuss in Lingzhou, in the eyes of the old foxes in the bureaucracy, it was like a child playing house. It was a childish act that would invite ridicule. But now, not many people dared to have such an arrogant attitude. Most of them secretly felt that this future king of Beiliang, even if he could not compare to Minister Chen, who would probably leave the capital in the future to become a vassal of Western Shu, the difference was not too far off. Chapter 948. Su Fengnian stopped his horse at the intersection between the north and south of the post road. Soon, an extremely majestic green horse appeared. This rider clearly came alone, but it still gave people the illusion that the horse's hooves were like thunder. In Huang Xiaokuai's field of vision, Su Fengnian gently squeezed the horse's belly and slowly moved forward. Huang Xiaokuai was speechless. The burly man with a spear in one hand did not wear an official's uniform or armor. It could be seen that His Royal Highness had an illustrious status. He also did not dismount from his horse. Huang Xiaokuai was impressed by the bearing of a martial arts grandmaster and a general on the battlefield. Su Fengnian calmly said, "Uncle Su, you've worked hard." Su Yanbing, who went to the border of Yuzhou to kill his way back and forth, smiled gently. Beimeng's Hong Jingyan endured and did not make a move. Otherwise, it would have been delayed for a few more days. Su Fengnian turned his horse around and rode side by side with this great grandmaster of Bailiang who was capable of conquering the Jianghu after the old god of swords Li Chungang. He could not help but ask curiously, "Uncle Su, if you really want to fight with the world's top 10 Hong Jingyan, what are your chances of winning?" Su Yanbing hesitated for a moment, then said indifferently, "Within 5 years, he'll die while I live. After all, I still have the advantage of a realm. It's hard to say what will happen in the future." That person is known as Beimeng's Little Tuoba along with the southern dynasty's Dong Zhuo. He has extraordinary talent. When he approaches the realm of earth immortals, we can only perish together. Su Fengnian nodded. Dong Zhuo's Little Tuoba was referring to this fatty's military talent. After the death of the fifth raccoon, Hong Jingyan had seized the opportunity to take over the Ruran cavalry. After the world's greatest demon, the white-robed Luo Yang, left Beimeng, he was already fully deserving of the title of the second strongest martial artist in Beimeng. It was said that after Tuoba Chun's son entered the first rank, he was arrogant. The first person he provoked was this Ruran lord. He lost miserably, but the more he was defeated, the braver he became. With a public 3-year agreement, he announced that he, Tuoba Chun's son, would break through one realm every 3 years. For every breakthrough, he would fight with Hong Jingyan, causing the Beimeng court to look at him in a different light. The Jianghu was just this cruel. Anyone could be reduced to a stepping stone for the next legendary figure. Other than the old monster Wang Xianji, who could compete with Lu Zhu 500 years ago, there was no one who was truly invincible. The beauty of the Jianghu was precisely this kind of cruelty and ruthlessness. It was just that if one wanted to become famous in one fell swoop, practicing the sword was comparatively more difficult. Putting aside the fact that Dong Tai was too immortal and there was no news of him, there were still many grandmasters of the way of the sword who overlooked the world's forest of swords. They were slightly better at practicing the blade. Only Gu Jiantang was a threshold that could not be bypassed. If one did not defeat them, it would be very difficult to claim that one's swordsmanship and blade techniques were the best in the world. The travel-worn Su Yanbing blended into the cavalry and asked in a low voice, "Your Highness, have you investigated the background of the master and servant pair of Ruliang?" Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "They are characters who came out of nowhere. We have never heard of them before. Not only did our Bailiang spies not know what to do, maybe Liang Zhaogo will also be accused of negligence. Actually, Liang Jianghu shouldn't have been so lonely these years. It was just that many grandmasters who had hopes of reaching first grade were killed by Han Diaoxi in secret. Some wandering immortals who pursued freedom, even if they reached first grade and stood aloof from worldly affairs, still couldn't escape from Han Diaoxi's bloody cat claws. Basically, every time they secretly left the capital under the emperor's orders, they would bring back 1 or 2 bloody heads. I really can't think of anyone who could escape the eyes of the imperial court in Zhaogo and suddenly appear as a first-grade expert. Not to mention those second-grade sects in the Jianghu, even Dragon Tiger Mountain, Wu family, and Sword Tomb aren't all first-grade experts. It is already hard to reach second-grade grandmaster, not to mention rare first-grade experts. Those who follow the rules won't be able to become top figures. Those who don't follow the rules have all died under Han Diaoxi's hands. Who knows who that fellow is? He really doesn't care about his life." Su Yanbing asked, "Do you need me to deal with that person?" Su Fengnian still shook his head. "There is no rush. If the Lingzhou Iron Cavalry are all embroidered pillows that can't withstand a single blow, then I'll let Uncle Su clean up the mess." Su Yanbing frowned. Since he is a first-grade expert, even if he is at the lowest Vajra realm, then even if he can't kill 700 to 800 cavalry in one breath, it won't be hard for him to escape. Unless that person lands on a vast plain where it is easy for cavalry to charge and is surrounded by many cavalry troops, And we don't give him a chance to rest, otherwise, it will be hard for him to escape. Back then when the Shishu Sword Emperor guarded the country gates, he had no choice but to die. That was why he was crushed to death by our Baelyang cavalry. If this person is at the Xian Finger Realm, with one or two types of celestial phenomenon comprehension that Qi cultivators are proficient in, it will undoubtedly be harder to capture him. When the Baelyang army stepped into the Jianghu and dealt with the sects of the Jianghu, those who died were the Jianghu people who were unwilling to give up their roots and leave their homes. In order to deal with the fish that escaped the net, they could only use the Jianghu people to capture and kill them. In the words of the general, it was killing the Jianghu people with the Jianghu people. Your Highness mobilizing the troops like this. Is it because you want to train the troops in Lingzhou? Su Fengnian nodded and said, since it's a game of cat and mouse, it doesn't matter if the mouse is too fat and the cat is too weak. In any case, there are many kittens that are being forced to work hard, and there are also many falcons that are hovering above our heads. There will always be a time when the mouse will slack off. This young master wants to close the door and slowly exhaust it to death. First, we will block it layer by layer, so that it can't move forward quickly. If it wants to kill, it has to be aware that it will be surrounded by a large number of soldiers. Lingzhou has mobilized a large number of scouts from the army to work with the old falcons and the new Eagle Guard. It is just to stop this first-grade mouse. If they can't even do this well, then so be it if they die. The senior commandant standing behind them will also be reprimanded by me. In this training, no matter if that pair of master and servant are numb to killing people, there will definitely be deaths. The Lingzhou officialdom did not kill anyone, and I am also holding back my anger. This is to prevent the soldiers of the Yu and Liang provinces from thinking that I only know how to talk and not use my blade. Su Yanbing smiled. Your Highness, it is best that you take away my Lingzhou Deputy General position. Just hearing about your Highness's complicated officialdom is giving me a headache. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, Uncle Su, can you tell me about the first grade 4 realms? Su Yanbing smiled. Just talking is useless. Your Highness needs to be able to take a beating. Su Fengnian's eyes lit up. Then I won't ride a horse and will run with Uncle Su to the border between Green Snake County and Dongfeng County? Su Yanbing did not express his opinion. The normal spear in his hand swept across. Su Fengnian, who had hurriedly reacted, slapped the spear with both hands. As a result, he was knocked off his horse and his body floated several dozen feet away. Su Yanbing leapt high into the air. At the same time, he raised his arm and threw out a spear. The spear was forceful as if it could split the heaven and earth. However, this martial artist was faster than the spear and arrived in front of His Highness, who was in a sorry state. He stepped on His Highness' left arm and His Highness slid down once again. Coincidentally, the tip of the spear was pointed at him. The Baelyang blade at his waist came out of its scabbard and blocked the might of the spear. Su Yanbing, who was holding the spear, shook his wrist and the spear blossomed. Su Fengnian was so miserable that he could only retreat again and again. It could be said that he was surrounded by danger. Huang Xiaokuai was so frightened that his face turned pale. He thought that this fellow was an assassin. Just as he was about to mobilize the troops to save His Royal Highness, Han Laozhan, who was sitting steadily on the horse, said calmly, It's fine. Give the order to continue forward. Chapter 949. The 600 riders had already passed through half of Green Snake County, but the Pearl Commandant, Huang Xiaokuai, still had not seen His Royal Highness. He was a bit impatient. If something happened to His Royal Highness, he was just a small commandant of Lingzhou. Even if he went to see the general, he would not be able to compensate for this crime. However, with Lingzhou's deputy general, Han Laozhan, comforting him, Huang Xiaokuai could only suppress his annoyance. After all, General Han had the special honor of being the general's personal retainer for more than a decade. He knew everything about the prince's manor in Mount Qingliang. This made Huang Xiaokuai feel a bit more at ease. Baelyang did not lack generals and warriors like Dong Yueqi, who had enjoyed glory and wealth for many years and lost their nature. However, there were also many honest people like Huang Xiaokuai who were deeply grateful and conscientious. The end of the Spring and Autumn War had only been a generation ago. This large manor in Baelyang had the Baimang barbarians eyeing it covetously from the north. Many people still remembered the bloody smell of war on themselves or their parents. Outside a wine shop, the wind and snow were howling. Large snowflakes rustled down like goose feathers. Two men, who were a generation younger than each other, sat opposite each other. They ordered 2 pots of extremely hard to drink but very good at warming their stomachs. They each drank slowly. There were very few customers in the wine shop. A long spear without tassels was placed on the table. This made the wine shop shopkeeper's desire to ask for a sky-high price somewhat dwindle. The heroes of Jianghu who could openly carry weapons on the northern Liang path were not simple. The owner covered his hand and couldn't help but take a few more glances at the shabbily dressed young master. He didn't look like a poor person. Why would he go out in such a shabby outfit in the bitter cold? Was he not afraid of freezing to death on the streets? This unreasonable god was a pitiful person who couldn't make it through the winter and spring socializing every year. Su Fengnian, who had been beaten up miserably along the way, drank a mouthful of strong wine. His entire body felt relaxed. Su Yanbing slowly said, 100 rivers flow into the sea, 10,000 streams return to their origin. Practicing the sword, the blade and the spear in the end is all about forging the body's spirit and will. However, to put it nicely, it's a summary. To put it bluntly, it's just empty logic. However, he had no choice but to say it. When Su Yanbing left his sect to roam Jianghu, his senior apprentice brother Wang Xiao and Li Chun Gang of the Spring and Autumn Sword and Armor were at the peak of Jianghu. He heard a lot of praises. Among them, Huang Longshan, who had monopolized the Spring and Autumn Sword Armor, said, "It's laughable that people are short-sighted. They didn't know the sword qi." At first, when he heard it, he only thought it was some literary praise. Later, when he really stepped into the mysterious finger realm from Vajra, he realized that these words were not without purpose. No matter how complicated the moves were or how simple they all had to retreat in front of the two words, divine will. The world's divine will was broken down into countless types. For example, there were many paths under our feet. Among them, the sword will path was the most eye-catching, because there were too many swordsmen walking on this path. It created the scene of mountains rising one after another, like an endless dragon vein. Previously, when Su Yanbing mentioned the sword will to His Highness, he did not simply want His Highness to abandon the saber and practice the sword. It was because of the solid foundation of the old god of swords two-sleeved green snake, and the sword tomb that nurtured the flying sword. Even if the realm fell, it would only fall in the internal energy. It would not hinder the spirit from rising from the ground. Especially when His Highness had comprehended it while playing the zither at the Peach Cheeks Pavilion. The cat-man Han Shangxian was able to kill the celestial phenomenon with the mysterious finger. Among the masters in the world, he was second only to Dong Tai. This was why he was called the invincible below the land immortals. The battle of life and death for us martial artists is not a debate between famous scholars. We will only do it by hook or by crook. The owner of the Western Sichuan cottage, who was killed by His Highness, was an example. He could be regarded as a land immortal if he was an armchair strategist. However, in front of the real top martial artists who had been tempered in blood, he was not worth mentioning. He was like a paper tiger that would be smashed with a poke. It was said that a poor family could not produce a noble son, and a gentle village could not produce a first-class master. These people walked the Jianghu. Even if they had a high starting point and were very fancy, they did not understand and disdained those unorthodox methods that did not conform to the rules. When facing a master of the same realm, they would only be humiliated. If not, how could they, who were born with famous teachers and secret manuals, not be at the top of the Jianghu? His Highness made Su Yanbing feel very gratified. It was because of the trip to Beimang. He put himself on the line of certain death and slowly cultivated the realm. He stumbled along the way, but once he got it, it was the real thing. His Highness was not like the younger generation of many famous families in the Jianghu. They had countless secret manuals in their hands, but none of them were written by their own painstaking efforts. If one followed the footsteps of others for a lifetime, how could one become a talent? Back then, Su Yanbing, left the sect for two reasons. Firstly, I was a disciple with a different surname, so I didn't want to compete with my senior brother Wang Xiao for anything. Secondly, I didn't want to be a frog at the bottom of a well. I wanted to see the local customs of the Jianghu with my own eyes, as well as the various immortals who had come out into the world. All these years, when I was drinking and chatting with my senior brother Han Laozhan, he also said that he entered the Jianghu too late, which was why he was stuck at the Finger Xian realm for so many years. Perhaps he would never be able to ascend to heavenly phenomenon in this lifetime. Back then, among the 4 direct disciples of my master, the one with the highest talent wasn't me, nor was it Wang Xiao. It was Wu Jinling, who had never appeared in the Jianghu before. He entered the grade at the age of 9, second grade at the age of 12, and Vajra at the age of 17. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's quite a pity. Otherwise, Bailiang would have one more great grandmaster who reached the peak." Chapter 950. Su Yanbing, who was rarely sentimental, sighed. In Jianghu, every time a stone is thrown, there will be ripples on the lake or huge waves on the river. There will definitely be people who will drown in it. Who knows when it will be my turn? If Wu Jinling is like Zhao Ningxian of the Taoist master's residence in Longhu Mountain, he will be at a higher level than me, Su Yanbing. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Some people are fine as bystanders in Jianghu, but they are not naturally suited to mingle in Jianghu. This is like those top scholars in the imperial court. In fact, not many of them can make it to the second rank. They will be disbanded after a few years. They are far inferior to those ordinary jinsha." Su Yanbing nodded and said, "It's hard not to believe in fate. Especially after entering the celestial state. Only then do I know that the illusory concept of fate is not a preposterous word used by the ancestors to scare people." Su Fengnian drank the wine in the bowl in one gulp and said in a low voice, "Previously when I was playing the zither, I was enlightened. After thinking about it, I only understood the word, come and go." Su Yanbing was very interested. He put down the bowl and asked with a smile, "Your Highness, what do you mean?" Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and looked out of the window at the fierce wind and snow. His eyes drifted and he said leisurely, "I once fought with Wang Xianji by chance. It was not a satisfying fight. Old Wang only used 70 to 80% of his strength at the last moment. After that, I was alone in the wilderness. I don't know if it was because I was in an out-of-body state or because I was possessed by the devil. Anyway, the first thing I did was to disperse mountains, rivers, and many things in the world in my mind. That kind of feeling was wonderful. It was as if the world was in my hands, but I could throw it away at will. It was as if the world was the king of the world. Then, without any external objects, I was bored to death. I took back those things one by one. But in this process, I was just a spectator at the beginning. I didn't catch anything. It wasn't until I was playing zither in the Peach Cheeks restaurant that I remembered the injustice of playing zither. In addition, I saw Song Yanqing's 14th sword. I vaguely felt that the Earth Immortal's sword was crying out for someone. Back then, I did a lot of ridiculous things like squandering money. Now, I was just picking them up one by one. But I didn't want to cry out for injustice. Instead, it was because I was in an out-of-body state. The last place before I collected my thoughts was above the clouds of the 9th heaven. In a trance, I seemed to see a flood dragon surging, moving clouds and summoning rain. There were also many immortals sitting in various positions. No matter how the clouds moved, they always held fishing rods in their hands. They didn't have hooks, but they sat high above the heads of all living creatures. They swung their fishing rods again and again, fishing up strands of the world's fate. Especially above the Bailiang, the number of times they raised their fishing rods was especially frequent. I was clearly familiar with the back of the immortal who was singing loudly, but I just couldn't remember who it was. I couldn't cry out for injustice. What should I do? So, I really want to know if there's really someone above us. Is there a way to try slaying a dragon and killing an immortal? Only then can I vent my anger. Even Su Yanbing, whose cultivation realm was unfathomable, was dumbfounded when he heard such crazy words that were loud enough to blot out the sky. Su Fengnian suddenly stood up and looked to the east. The spring and autumn sword that was hovering outside the East Sea Martial Emperor City finally moved. To the east of Dongfeng County was Gui County. An elegant young master wearing a black robe rode slowly on a horse. A long saber with a white scabbard rested on his shoulder. His hands lazily rested on the sword, which rose and fell with the horse. A folding fan was inserted into the jade belt on his waist. He looked relaxed. Beside him was a retainer who didn't ride a horse. His figure was strong and healthy, and he was running wildly behind the man and the horse. The handsome young master suddenly stopped his horse and turned to look to the east. The strong retainer asked carefully, "Young master, that Bailiang's son can't hold back anymore?" The young master's slender and fair fingers gently tapped the scabbard, as if gently comforting the famous saber in the scabbard. He smiled charmingly and said, "Not yet. But that person from Suacia Valley's sword has eaten its fill. He's preparing to fight Wang Xianji with a sword." The retainer grinned and said, "Young master, if His Royal Highness really kills Mount Bubang's leader Fifth Raccoon, he won't be easy to deal with. You have to be careful. The young master rolled his eyes like a woman's coquettish eyes. Slap him. The retainer, who reminded him out of kindness, immediately kept quiet out of fear. He slapped his face hard, and scarlet blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Only then did the satisfied young master continue to urge his horse forward. He muttered to himself, "Everyone says that the previous leader of Wudong, Hong Shixiang, is the reincarnation of the devil-slaying platform's Qi Xian Zhang. As for me, I can barely be considered relatives with those uncles and aunts who were killed by the great spiritual master Qi Xian Zhang. Even if their seniority is the same as mine, their age is still there. I don't know why Hong Shixiang killed himself. Since that person surnamed Su has a deep relationship with Wudong Mountain, if I don't find trouble with him, who else can I find trouble with? Wait until this young master takes care of Su Fengnian and stays in Beiliang for a year or two. Then, I'll be able to take control of Zhulu Mountain. It's not a good feeling to have a woman of unknown origin ride on top of my head. This young master has never had the hobby of women on top of men. I'll let her fight with Mount Huishan Shenyuan Qingfeng first. If it doesn't work out, I'll personally go to Zhulu Mountain and clean up the sect. Although I'm still not that woman's match in a one-on-one fight, I'll bring a few thousand cavalry and 100 inner court experts. Even that Wang Xianji, I'll be able to cause trouble for him. This demonic sect, sooner or later, it'll be this young master's rightful possession." The retainer snickered. "Young master, you'll be able to sit firmly on the dragon throne." The young master loosened his grip on the scabbard, and the scabbard spun out a large circle. With him and his horse as the center, the snowflakes within 100 feet radius were crushed into pieces. The retainer clearly heard the young master on the horse sneer. "Yu Zhang, you're a Vajra realm expert after all. You even managed to escape from the hands of a human cat. Can't you have some backbone? It's very embarrassing to bring a lousy piece of trash like you out." The retainer smiled obsequiously. It's already a great honor to run errands and do odd jobs by young master's side. The young master curled his lips into a smile. "It seems that the 80% mature thunder of mind I learned from Gu Jiantang has broken your backbone." The retainer nodded vigorously in agreement. The young master looked up at the snowy sky with a helpless expression. Jianghu is boring. Chapter 951. Huang Xiaokuai's 600 riders were about to enter the eastern Wind County, but they still did not see His Highness the Crown Prince's figure. Even though Lingzhou's Deputy General Han Laozhan was still calm and composed, this Pearl Commandant also secretly sent a trusted scout back to Lingzhou's capital to report the military situation. Huang Xiaokuai did not know if Dong Yueqi and the other commandants were the same. In any case, he had an old turtle in the city that kept in secret contact with him all year round. Every year, they would coincidentally bump into each other a few times. Han Laozhan, who was watching from the shadows, retracted his gaze. Seeing the elite scout leave, he admired Huang Xiaokuai a little more. Han Laoshan's martial cultivation was far from his junior brother Su Yambing, who was not very famous. However, Han Laozhan knew that he had no hope of reaching the top of Jianghu, so he placed most of his ambition on the battlefields at the border. Over these years, he had been influenced by the great general and had a unique understanding of the situation in Beiliang. The geographical advantage of Beiliang had always been widely criticized. However, in Han Laoshan's eyes, Beiliang's land was narrow and barren, and the people's livelihood was not great. However, this disadvantage was not necessarily a bad thing. There was a saying in the countryside that exhausted one's strength. Beiliang made enemies on all sides, and this unknowingly created the bravery and fierceness of the people. Compared to the rich Jiangnan, the people who grew up in the barren mountains and turbulent rivers were all valiant and did not fear death. If this was not the case, how could there be such a rich source of soldiers at the border of Beiliang? No matter how valiant and good at fighting soldiers were, if they were thrown into a safe place where they did not have to worry about food and clothing, and their morale would be worn down for 10 to 20 years, they would not be considered valiant soldiers. This was an important reason why the Guangling Prince Zhao Yi was not as good as the Yanqi Prince Zhao Bing. Guangling Circuit was located under the armpit of the imperial court, while Yanqi Circuit was like the right foot of the imperial court. They had to travel every day and interact with the barbarians of Nanjiang. Han Laozhan knew that he only needed to wait until His Highness left Lingzhou before he would become a general with real power in one of Beiliang's 3 prefectures, Yuliang and Lingling. He would be a third-rank official in the Liang dynasty and share military and political power with the provincial governor, Su Beiji. Moreover, as a general, he was only a person who managed the Bailiang's backyard. However, when that traitorous martial nephew, Chen Jibao, left the capital and went to the western Shu Dao, it would be a fight that would not be inferior to the bloody massacre at the border. As for Chen Jibao, who had betrayed his sect, as his martial uncle, Han Laozhan did not hold a grudge against him. There were rules in Jianghu, and senior martial brother Wang Xiu's death was not as aggrieved and wronged as the outside world thought. Thinking of this, Han Laozhan could not help but laugh. If his junior martial brother, Wu Jinling, who had unfortunately died in the Vajra realm, their sect would successively produce spear immortal Wang Xiu, Su Yanbing, who was even better than eldest martial brother, Han Laozhan, who had reached the mysterious finger realm, Wu Jinling, and the new Confucian sage Chen Jibao. In the future, there might even be Blue Bird, who had taken over the handbrake spear, who would also ascend to the first rank. In just 2 generations and 2 generations, they had produced 6 first-rank experts. This was even grander than the formation of 2 top scorers and 1 family's 3 second places. In Liang and Beimang, only the Wu family's sword tomb and the chess and sword music school could stand shoulder to shoulder in Jianghu. Han Laozhan wondered if he should ask His Highness to raise the banner of the Wang family. Perhaps this would attract many Jianghu experts to join Bailiang and join the Wang family. In the future, the Bailiang army might have a Wang faction of the Wang family's spear. The 600 cavalrymen stopped briefly in Dongfeng County. They did not enter the city, but stayed where they were to rest and reorganize. Huang Xiaokuai only ordered a dozen or so elite cavalrymen to escort the carriage. He found a first-class restaurant so that the woman would be more comfortable. Huang Xiaokuai did not work in the bureaucracy. It was not that he did not understand, but he did not want to be in the same company as his colleagues who were not worthy of their Bailiang armor. Since this woman had a deep relationship with His Highness, and they were not in a hurry, he was happy to go with the flow. It was just that the road to happiness was strewn with setbacks. When Huang Xiaokuai saw the silhouette of a horse carriage at the city gates, other than the Pearl Cavalry under his command, who were dressed in casual clothes, there was also a large group of local knights who had somehow hooked up with them. Unable to escape the vulgar path of a profligate young master, there was also a large group of Jianghu disciples swarming over. Huang Xiaokuai fiercely spat on the back of his horse. These bastards actually dared to rob His Highness? Those Pearl cavalrymen also had good eyesight. When they saw the carriage heading towards Huang Xiaokuai's side, they immediately reined in their horses and hurriedly ordered their accomplices not to act rashly. However, a few of the cavalrymen were too busy trying to steal wives for the young masters in the city to stop their horses in time. When the simple carriage was less than 20 paces away from Huang Xiaokuai and his men, they finally realized that the situation was not good. They were about to turn their horses around. Huang Xiaokuai, who was sitting high up on his horse, had a ruthless look in his eyes. He shook his head. Next to him, an archer with outstanding strength in the Pearl cavalryman expressionlessly took out an arrow from his quiver and shot it. With a pang, the arrow pierced through the air, piercing through the skull and nailing into the snow. The pile of pale white snow on the side of the road was instantly dyed red by the fresh blood. The other 2 Jianghu cavalrymen wished that their mounts did not have an extra pair of hooves, but they were still shot to death one by one. Without exception, an arrow pierced through their heads, killing them on the spot. In the northern Liang region, who would dare to compete with a General Seed who had military merits and was arrogant and domineering? Huang Xiaokuai expressionlessly squeezed his horse's belly. The date-red horse under him trotted forward. He took out the Bailiang saber from his waist and used the scabbard to point at a young master wearing a fur coat at the front. That fellow's face was gloomy and uncertain. Finally, he gathered his courage and slowly urged his horse forward. He was about to introduce himself and his father's surnamed general to prevent this foreign military officer wearing a military officer's armor from overthrowing the Dragon King Temple. Huang Xiaokuai already said in a neither cold nor warm tone, Lingzhou's general has already ordered the 6 counties of Lingzhou to not allow more than 5 cavalrymen to ride on the streets. Violators will be sent to the torture chamber for the first time and be whipped 50 times. Repeat offenders will be punished regardless of their family background. That young master did not think much of it, but in front of him, 3 people had died on the spot. He also saw that behind this military officer were strong, and there were cavalrymen in succession. It did not seem like a normal army. He could only obediently smile and say, General, this is my first offense today. I will go to the Yamen to surrender myself. I hope the general will not be angry. Huang Xiaokuai paused and asked, You're called Gu Rund? Who is Dongfeng County's Shiwu General Gu Yunshi to you? The young master was delighted and quickly said, "He is my father. I wonder who the general is." Huang Xiaokuai smiled eerily and put away the Bailiang's saber from his waist. He raised his arm and waved it. While the young master was stunned, another arrow swept through the wind and snow. Just as he thought that he had died in front of his house for no reason, his vision blurred. His body trembled and he swallowed with difficulty. He saw an unfamiliar young man standing next to the ruthless military officer. In his hand was the arrow that should have taken his life. The Pearl military officer, Huang Xiaokuai, quickly dismounted from his horse. Not only him, but all the other Pearl cavalrymen also dismounted and stood at the same time. They stood like javelins stuck in the snow, respectful and reverent, their eyes blazing. Huang Xiaokuai did not call out His Royal Highness' identity. He only saw that the dumb goose had the guts to sit on his horse and not move. He was about to draw his saber and kill him personally. The young master, whose tattered clothes were not as luxurious as Gu Run's, shook his head and threw the arrow back high. It just so happened that it was thrown to the archer. He smiled warmly at the young master of the Gu family, who had finally regained his senses and had rolled off his horse to kneel on the ground. "I've heard that you, Gu Rund, once had a dispute with a group of rich young masters from Yenzhou. You taught them a lesson. After that, you said that no matter who they were, if they dared to behave atrociously in our Bailiang, you would teach them a lesson. It's a pity that your father had to privately compensate a Yenzhou general for this matter. Young Master Gu, I wonder if you still have this kind of backbone these past 2 years?" Gu Rund raised his head. His mind spun rapidly as he tried to guess the identity of this person. At the same time, he tried to find a way out of the situation. Yes. This is all learning from His Highness the Crown Prince. His Highness said that only hedonistic sons who dare to point their spears at men from other places can be said to have reached the Grandmaster level in the competitive business of hedonism. This time, it was Gu Rund who was reckless and wanted to puff himself up at his own cost. He wanted to protect that Lady Yong Rong on her journey, and he definitely didn't want to do the despicable business of snatching people away. He only wanted to let the lady in the carriage leave safely. Gu Rund had been observing the situation the whole time. When he saw that person nod with a smile, he finally felt relieved. He heard that person's mellow voice say with a smile, "Let's forget about today. Go back to the city and tell your friends that riding horses in the city is only allowed to run as fast as a normal person. If more than 5 horses disturb the people on the streets, don't even talk about bumping into people. As long as they are caught, they will be punished according to the new rules. If there is a yamen that dares to cover for them, they will be stripped of their official position and sent to the border guard station. That's right, Gu Rund. Remember to tell your father, Gu Yunshi, that I used to steal his wine pouch when I was young. If this General Wu still holds a grudge, he can go to Liangzhou and ask for it from me. As for you, Gu Rund, if you have the heart to stop harming the little rich young masters in the village, you can join the army. I will help you plead with this Pearl Commandant beside me to open the back door for you." Chapter 952. The previous chapter had more than 5,000 words, so this chapter is a bit late. The man and woman generally lived together peacefully. They passed through Dongfeng County and approached Zhigui County. Su Fengnian and Pei Nanwei rode side by side on a deep plank road. Another 100 li to the east was Tongmen Pass, which was known as a natural barrier. There was a saying that Tongmen Pass was solid, but Bailiang was solid. It was fully deserving of being the most important pass in Zhigui County. It was heavily guarded, and the captain of Tongmen Pass, Xian Ma, had 6,000 elite soldiers. He was undoubtedly a trusted general that the king of Bailiang valued the most. This time, Su Fengnian moved the troops from all over Lingzhou out of their encampments, but not a single soldier was moved from Tongmen Pass. It was enough to show the extraordinary position of Tongmen Pass in Lingzhou. Su Fengnian did not let Huang Xiaokuai's 600 cavalry follow. Instead, he took a detour to Tongmen Pass to rest and reorganize. He only brought Pei Nanwei and Su Yanbing on the secret plank road that only the military horses could step on. In the past, there were some officials and generals who came here to compete in horsepower. Now that there was an order, they did not want to run into the tip of the spear before the Lingzhou general left. The reason why Pei Nanwei wanted to get out of the carriage to take a breath of fresh air was because she came from a family of scholars. She had heard that the previous dynasty's poet-emperor used a poem from Tongmen to win the title of the frontier fortress poem of the previous dynasties. That was how Zhigui County came to be. It was said that there was a cliff carving of a sword hero left on the mountain wall in front of them. Her heart yearned to see it. Su Fengnian's hands did not pull on the reins. He closed his eyes and focused, allowing the warhorse to run forward. Pei Nanwei's equestrian skills were average, but she was not afraid of falling off the horse and getting injured. She took off her veiled hat and put on a sable fur coat. She rode a handsome black horse. In the white snow, it was hard to say whether she was like an agile butterfly or a peony swaying in the wind and snow. When Pei Nanwei stopped the horse and raised her head to look at the blurry stone carvings on the cliff, it seemed that there was nothing special about it. She came in high spirits but returned in disappointment. Especially when Su Fengnian mentioned this plank road to her. Just in the previous dynasty, there were more than 20,000 corpses in this area. This made Pei Nanwei's hair stand on end. She no longer had the least bit of leisure and elegance. It was almost dusk. Above her head was the heavy snow that did not want to stop. The plank road was dead silent and gloomy. She was obviously a little scared. She had no choice but to find something to talk about. She slowed down the horse and asked the man beside her why the Bailiang spies could not find out the details of the master and servant pair. Su Fengnian reached out his hand and accumulated a palm full of snowflakes. He held out a small round snowball and said carelessly, "A good spy is even rarer and more valuable than those brave and skillful military officers. Not only must they be able to endure the loneliness year after year, they must withstand conspiracy after conspiracy. The key is that they must always be loyal and devoted. They must also be able to take charge of an area and filter out all kinds of information. In the end, they have to risk their lives to deliver it back. Therefore, without 5 or 6 years of polishing, it is impossible to produce a qualified spy that can be used with confidence. Some old spies either disappear at will or directly betray the enemy camp. The difficulty of espionage lies in the fact that it is already difficult for spies to do things. It is even more important to test a person's tenacity. Not everyone is willing to do this job. In the past, in Chu Lushan's hands, there were more than 30 provinces in Bailiang. For more than 20 years, there were only about 400 people trained. What's more, half of them needed to be cast long lines to catch big fish. If they were divided among more than 30 provinces and more than 200 counties, how many people could each county have? In addition, last year, in order to help those scholars pass away smoothly, many precious spies who had been hiding for many years were lost. Besides, our Bailiang spared no effort to eradicate the spies on both sides of Liang and Beimang. Zhao Go and Spiderweb also didn't rest for a single day. Every year, many people died between the three sides. It was fortunate that Chu Lushan was in charge of espionage. If it were anyone else, Bailiang would have long been blinded. Just those 300,000 cavalry, which is very frightening, won't be able to win a big battle. In the War of the Southern Dynasty, the Bailiang cavalry advanced all the way. A large part of the military merit had to be credited to the Bailiang spies. Last time when I went to Huangnam County, I only cared about killing people to vent my anger. I killed a few double-faced spies. After that, my sister scolded me for being a wastrel who didn't know the cost of daily necessities. Indeed, I wasn't wronged. Su Fengnian gently tossed the snowball into the distance. He said softly, "This world is really too big. It's not easy to find one person." Pei Nanwei shot a glance at him. She couldn't see his Royal Highness expression clearly. She only felt that there was a faint sense of desolation that was rarely seen. The wind and snow whistled. They were still dozens of li away from Tongmen Pass. Normally, the journey wouldn't be long, but at this moment, the snow on the plank road was thick and the horses' hooves were sinking. Even though Pei Nanwei was wearing a warm marten fur coat, she began to feel that the suffering was not light. Moreover, in the eyes of an expert, her equestrian skills were really shoddy. Su Fengnian looked at the sky. There were signs that it was getting heavier. The three of them were riding against the wind, but Pei Nanwei insisted on riding alone in the wind and snow. Su Fengnian looked on coldly from the side. When her horse suddenly slipped, her hands were already cold and numb. She didn't have the strength to hold the reins tightly. Just like that, she fell onto the plank road and rolled. Fortunately, the snow was soft and there was no injury. Su Fengnian reined in his horse and turned around. He stretched out a hand. She was stubborn. After standing up, she turned around and reached into the collar of her marten fur coat. She used her body temperature to warm her hands. She gritted her teeth and continued to ride forward. Su Fengnian was too lazy to ridicule her. He urged his horse to speed up and blocked in front of her horse to block the biting cold wind. When they finally saw the towering walls and flickering lights of Tongmen Pass, Pei Nanwei, who had endured to the end, finally fainted and fell off the horse. Su Fengnian then carried her onto the horse and quickly rode into the city. Chapter 953. His Highness the Heir of Tongmen personally led the way and led His Highness the Heir into that simple official residence that did not have the slightest bit of extravagance. When Pei Nanwei woke up with a splitting headache, she discovered that she was lying in a room as warm as spring. Aside from the fact that her snow-soaked fur coat had been taken off, her clothes were in perfect condition. Only then did Princess Consort Jean Gon, who looked as if she had just made a trip to the gates of hell, slightly recovered her soul. Turning her head, she saw that a stove had been set up in the room. The man whose back was facing the bed was currently boiling wine. The aroma of the wine wafted through the air. Pei Nanwei, whose stomach was rumbling with hunger, rested her strength and put on a pair of brand-new warm boots. She sat next to him and reached out to warm herself. Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and pointed at the carved mahogany food box on the stool, indicating that she was well-fed and well-clothed. However, he very kindly poured her a cup of scalding rice wine. Pei Nanwei opened the lid of the food box and did not pay attention to any decorum. She buried her head in the food and wolfed down the food. After drinking that cup of wine, she ordered another 2 cups. Very quickly, she began to feel a strong sense of fatigue. Perhaps because she was worried about him, she endured the urge to fight back and did not go to bed to sleep. In reality, the two of them were well aware that they were making a bet. They were betting on who would be the first to surrender. Before that, they would mind their own business. There was no need for her to deliberately put on a chaste and virtuous attitude. Pei Nanwei raised her eyelids and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. His face was illuminated by the light of the charcoal fire. He took off his outer coat, revealing the dark green soft armor that even a layman like Pei Nanwei could see was priceless. She bit her lips to wake herself up a bit. Her voice was hoarse as she asked, "Why do you want to practice the blade?" Su Fengnian was slightly distracted. He then shook his head and said in a flat voice, "I told you for fun. If I told you that I wanted to be a hero who would help others when I saw injustice, you would definitely not believe me. If I say it's to save my life, you're going to say that I don't know how lucky I am and that I'm pretending to be sick." Pei Nanwei poured herself a cup of wine, but she did not drink it all in one gulp like before. Instead, she placed the warm wine cup against her cheek and said with a smile, "Regarding your original intention of practicing the blade, I believe in the former more." She finally had the mood to chat, but Su Fengnian's mood was bleak. He said indifferently, "We still have to hurry on with the journey tomorrow morning. You sleep. Don't worry, I'll go out when I'm done." Pei Nanwei frowned her naturally charming brows, but still went to lie down on the bed. She held onto the corner of the blanket with both hands. She didn't hear any movement for a long time, so she turned around and looked at the back of the figure in the room. Not long after, he used a pair of tongs to stir up some ash and covered it with the charcoal so that it would burn slower. Then, he got up and quietly left the room. Su Fengnian came to the top of the wall of Tongmen Pass. Su Yambing and Wei Shaking were standing far away. They were sensible enough not to disturb him. The snow continued to fall for an entire night. At the first glimmer of dawn, the green hills turned white. A rider and a servant entered Zheguei County without any obstructions. Ever since they entered the borders of Bailiang and intimidated a few squads of government troops that were as insignificant as ants, it was as if they had entered a no-man's land. The retainer with the strength of the Vajra realm couldn't help but ask, "Young master, is this Bailiang heir so scared that he's hiding? Does he really think that everything will be fine just because he's hanging a no-war sign?" The handsome young master who was gently patting his palm with a folding fan was enjoying the snowy scenery along the way. He mocked, "Yuzhang, oh Yuzhang. You really think with your butt. Back then, Han Diaosi didn't kill you. Was it because he thought you'd dirty his hands?" The robust retainer chuckled softly and didn't dare to talk back. The young master opened and closed the peach blossom beauty folding fan in his hand. He smiled and said, "His Royal Highness won't be so cowardly as to avoid the sharp edge. However, this young master really doesn't put him in my eyes. I still want to experience White Bear Yuan Zuozong's left-handed saber. Everyone only knows that Yuan Baixiong is the world champion in horse combat, but they don't know that he had once sparred with Gu Jiantang. After that, He switched to using his left hand to practice his saber, thinking of getting back at our General Gu someday. However, it's not easy for this young master to meet Yuan Baixiong, the commander of the cavalry. No matter how useless the Bailiang cavalry in Lingzhou is, they still can't be underestimated. Let's see how big of a welcoming party Su Fengnian can put up. Yu Zhang, if it's just a small fight with a few hundred cavalry, I'll leave it to you. Remember, it's okay to break an arm or a leg, but don't kill anyone. The Vajra realm servant twisted his neck, and it cracked like a string of soybeans. He nodded and smiled sinisterly. If His Royal Highness is stingy and uses 300 to 400 cavalry to fool you, no matter how thick the formation is, it won't be able to withstand a few attacks from me. The young master didn't wear a saber on his waist. Instead, he used a long vermilion rope to tie the famous saber. The other end of the rope was tied to his wrist, and he just hung it on the side of the horse's belly, swaying. Yu Zhang glanced at the saber, and there was some fear in his eyes. This thing was a heavy weapon that was on par with the world's #1 talisman saber, South Flower. He didn't know which senior came up with the name, but he didn't care at all. It was simply called Crossing the River. Yu Zhang was a famous figure in the Devil sect. 60 years ago, a few sky devils went to the devil-slaying platform to challenge the great immortal of Mount Longhu, Qi Xianzhu. In the end, not only did they fail to divide the world, but they were also slaughtered. Since then, Zhulu Mountain has been in decline. Yu Zhang, as an outer mountain disciple of the Devil sect, could barely be considered a first-class master. Especially after reaching the first rank, Yu Zhang became complacent. He refused the recruitment of the last remaining Duke of Mount Zhulu, and did not enter the mountain to be conferred the title of Marquis. Instead, he led a group of people to revolt, calling himself the leader of the Devil sect. He set off a bloody storm in the martial arts world, but before he could make a name for himself in Jianghu, he was stopped by a big eunuch in a bright red robe. This human cat came alone, and except for him, everyone else was skinned and had their tendons pulled out. If Han Diaoxi hadn't spared his life to find out the secret location of Mount Zhulu, he would have died a long time ago. However, after Mount Zhulu no longer invited him to enter the mountain, Yu Zhang was like a rat on the street. He was always on tenterhooks, afraid that this human cat would treat him like a piece of trash and kill him. When news of Han Diaoxi's death came from the capital last year, he cried tears of joy. He was wondering if he could make a comeback in Jianghu, but in the end, he was beaten up by this young master who claimed to be from Mount Zhulu. He was even able to use General Gu's Thunder Heart Square, and many secret techniques of the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool. His own skills were all seen by this young man once, and he was able to use them for his own use. So what if Yu Zhang was a first-rank master? How could he not be shocked? Yu Zhang had to admit that there were indeed martial arts geniuses that were hard to come by in 100 years. In the past, it was Wang Xianji, Li Chungang, and the other seniors of the Jianghu. In the future, it would most likely be the young owner of the Crossing the River saber. The young man raised his head and saw a peregrine falcon fly by. He smiled charmingly and said to himself, "It's a bit slow." Chapter 954. Peregrine falcons constantly flew above the master and servant. Yu Zhang was only a boorish man and was not familiar with military formations. He did not know what these 7 or 8 military falcons meant, but he could clearly feel the cold aura of dark clouds pressing down on the city. Yu Zhang squatted down and pressed one hand on the ground of the post road. He wanted to report the situation of the enemy to the young master with the folding fan. There were 200 riders charging toward them, but Yu Zhang quickly remembered that the young master's realm was much higher than his, and the Shen finger had the mysterious power of divination, so he did not want to flatter him. Yu Zhang picked up a snowball and weighed it in his hand, wondering if he should smash an eyesore falcon to death. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a particularly bold scout. The other scouts in all directions all stopped their horses at a distance. Yu Zhang stood up with a grim smile and swung his arm. Remembering the soldier's order, the snowball shot out and hit the warhorse's head. It suddenly exploded into a cloud of scarlet blood, and the warhorse died instantly. The scout rolled on the ground. Instead of running away in panic, he quickly took out his short crossbow and ran toward the man who killed the horse. After a dozen steps, he finally remembered the military order and turned around to retreat resentfully. On the way to his beloved warhorse, the young scout's eyes turned red. He took off the Nanmu horse tag tied to the horse's neck and put it into his pocket before running away. The young master with the folding fan did not pay attention to Yu Zhang's small quarrel. His line of sight followed the mountain ridge and looked at a mountain peak that was not too tall in the distance. According to his original plan, they would be intercepted by a group of cavalry stationed in Zhigui County. There would be at least 300 to 400, and at most 600 to 700. He would let Yu Zhang warm up and crush the courage of this Bailiang cavalry. After penetrating the formation, he would use his speed to charge straight into Tongmen Pass. Then, he would personally engage in a fierce battle with the elite cavalry of Tongmen Pass. No matter who won or lost, he would become famous overnight. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not show his life-saving talisman. Of course, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could suppress the 6,000 cavalry of Tongmen Pass alone. Most likely, he would only fight and retreat at the same time. If he really did not retreat, he would end up like the Sword Emperor of Shishu. The Wu family's 9 swords breaking 10,000 cavalry, and Li Chuangong's 1 sword killing 2,600 cavalry on the Guangling River a few years ago, did not have good endings. When this young master who broke the border alone raised his head to look at the mountain peak, there were also people who were looking into the distance. By Su Fengyan's side, other than Pei Nanwei, Su Yambing and Han Laozhan, the 2 deputy generals of Lingzhou, there were also the 2 military officers of Tongmen Pass, Wei Shaking and Xian Ma, as well as the military officer of Pearl, Huang Xiaokuai. The 2 generals Wei and Xian were different from Huang Xiaokuai. This time they did not bring a single soldier with them. Pearl's 600 light cavalry were all waiting at the foot of the mountain. The 200 cavalry that Yu Zhang sensed were Zhigui County's military officer Ma Jinchai's men and horses. This time Su Fengyan used his status as Lingzhou's general to issue an order to have Dongfeng Zhigui and several other counties' soldiers and horses to leave their respective bases. As for the several counties' yamen and soldiers moving out in full force, it was nominally under the new Lingzhou provincial governor Su Beiji. With the mountain peak as the center, all the small and large post roads within a radius of 30 li were tightly sealed. Merchants had to take a detour. Close to 100 scouts were scattered all over the place. Regardless of direction, they strived to have a scout every 3 li. Ma Jinchai's frozen field cavalry was divided into 3 groups, gradually forming a formation. The 200 cavalry took the lead to spy on the situation. Other than that, there was also the Dongfeng Northern Country captain, Ren Chunyun, who brought 400 soldiers and horses. They were waiting for orders in the southwest. Fengqiu captain Zhu Boyu personally led 500 cavalry in the northwest, eyeing covetously. The troops of the various government offices, military offices, and torture chambers weaved through the gaps in the northwest. The ranks of captains in Bailiang were very messy, and there was a huge disparity in the number of soldiers they could command. For example, Tongmen Pass's Wei Shaking and Xian Ma each led 3,000 men, but their ranks were still 1 rank lower than Pearl captain Huang Xiaokuai, who was also a rank 4. Frozen Field captain Ma Jinchai, Northern Country captain Ren Chunyun, and Fengqiu captain Zhu Boyu were of the same rank as Wei Xian and Fengqiu captain. However, all the soldiers under their command added together could not compare to a single captain in Tongmen Pass. The military officials of northern Liang were strong and powerful, suppressing the civil officials to the point that they could not raise their heads. However, they themselves also had many factions, with mountains in great numbers. Other than the long-standing disputes at the border, there were also disputes over the passes and counties, and within the counties, there were disputes over who was truly lacking in merit officers. Being caught in it was like falling into a spider's web. The slightest movement would affect the entire body, causing a shock and rebound. When Su Fengyan was trying to clean up the officialdom in Lingzhou, he was not looked upon favorably because of this. Han Laozhan raised a jujube spear named Xiaoman's shoulder, and laughed softly. This person definitely did not expect your highness to be so bold, directly mobilizing 4 captains and close to 3,000 cavalry to crush him in Zhigui County. You did not give him a chance to go to Tongmen Pass, much less enter Lingzhou to steal his reputation. Su Fengyan laughed. If he can use the methods of the Jianghu people and take the head of a general in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers, do you think the court will bestow him the title of general? Tongmen Pass's Wei Shaking sneered. Based on this kid's ability, he can't even go up the mountain. I heard that this fellow is very tender and has the appearance of a beautiful woman. Brother Xian, you have a variety of tastes. When your highness has tied him up, why don't you ask your highness to bring him back to Tongmen Pass to be a concubine? Tongmen Pass's captain Xian Ma, who had a feminine appearance, was mocked by Old Wei. He did not retort and said softly, "I do have such an idea, but how would I dare to act on my own and ruin your highness's plan? Old Wei, since you're interested in drinking horses, why don't you give me your little son, and we'll become in-laws? In the future, I'll call you father-in-law. It doesn't matter if I'm 1 generation younger than you." Chapter 955. Wei Shacking, who had been checkmated, was so angry that he kicked Lieutenant Xian's horse in the stomach and cursed. He and Xian Yinma came from different mountains in the Bailiang army. Wei Shacking was a general who was close to the general, while Xian Yinma had moved through various armies. He had held a military position under Zhong Hongguo, Chen Jibao, and other old Bailiang giants. Later on, he was involved with the infantry commander Yan Wenwan. Now, Xian Yinma could be considered half a member of the Yan family. However, he had gotten along well with Wei Shacking and Tongmen Pass these years. Inside the pass, they had schemed and plotted against each other. It was true that they had to support the 3,000 soldiers under each of them who were crying piteously for officials, money, and military equipment. They could not tolerate their noble character and unquestionable integrity, but they had always maintained unity with the outside world. Everyone knew that Lieutenant Xian liked men. He did not care much about the matter of accumulating wealth and family property. If an old commander wanted to show filial piety to Xian Yinma, he would spend a lot of money to buy a well-trained young master from Jiangnan and send him to the Xian manor. This was more useful than anything else. Fortunately, the king of Bailiang had never been a harsh and merciless master. He had never made a fuss about these dirty things that did not affect Bailiang's military and politics. Xian Yinma glanced at the young man who had already left his post as Lingzhou's general. After hearing the conversation between him and Wei Shacking, he turned a deaf ear. His smiling face was still the same. He looked down at the courier road at the foot of the mountain and slowly said, "It's starting." Xian Yinma focused and straightened his back to look into the distance. Ma Jinchai's 200 riders had already charged toward the master and servant pair. Xian Yinma had always looked down on Lieutenant Dong Yi and Ma Jinchai's soldiers. In his opinion, the 3 legs of these soldiers were all weak. It was said that circling around to block the retreat path should have been Lieutenant Zhu Boyu's military mission. Ma Jinchai had shamelessly begged His Highness for this good job of achieving military merit. Furthermore, she did not care about the established military order to keep a distance from the master and servant. Instead, she initiated the charge on her own. It was clear that she believed the pair of Jianghu ruffians were easy to bully. As long as she captured the 2, she would not be afraid of His Highness's punishment afterwards. As for whether or not she would become enemies with Huang Xiaokuai, who was isolated in Lingzhou, Ma Jinchai, who had a marriage relationship with Commander Yan's relative, would not care. Fan fan. The young master fanned himself and closed his eyes to rest. Behind him, he could hear the sound of horse hooves. There was no such thing as the rumor of 100 Bailiang cavalry being able to shake the heavens. He had already experienced General Gu Zhentong's skill in managing an army when he was at the eastern border of Ji province. He had once been pursued by 600 Gu Zhentong's cavalry across a vast plain for a long time. That was the true definition of a powerful army. If the Bailiang cavalry was only at the level of 200 cavalry behind him, then the Bailiang cavalry would be a huge joke. Even such a force of 2,000 could be defeated by the 600 Gu Zhentang cavalry. Without needing his master's signal, Lu Zhang turned around to face the 200 embroidered pillows. Taking a deep breath, the tip of his foot rubbed against the cold and hard ground of the relay station, instantly creating a pit. His figure floated out of the pit, the short crossbow sprinkling a black rain that didn't hurt or itch. In the eyes of an expert, it was somewhat comical. Although Lu Zhang looked aggressive, he was actually still 60 to 70 zhang away. Ma Jinchai, who was at the bottom of the 200 cavalry, didn't feel anything wrong. There were more than a dozen brightly armored cavalry escorting her. Among them, there was actually a charming and petite retainer wearing a gorgeous light armor. She was clearly a woman with a graceful figure. It turned out that in addition to snatching the credit, Ma Jinchai also wanted to show off his commanding skills in front of the doting beauty. However, Ma Jinchai's expression changed drastically. She saw that the 200 riders were only focused on charging forward, but that Jianghu man's speed was far faster than a warhorse's. The second wave of crossbows splashed down on his head, but it could not be said that they missed. It was just that the man did not even bother to reach out his hand to block the crossbow bolts, allowing them to hit his body. Like a reed pole hitting iron or stone, the crossbow bolts broke off and slid down. He did not give the riders a chance to continue playing. He had already come face to face with the 3 riders in the lead. The 3 riders were shocked and immediately threw away their crossbows. They hurriedly raised their spears and rushed into the gap between 2 galloping riders. Yu Zhang jumped high, his body flattened, punched his horse and kicked it. The rider on the left that was closest to the outside was also affected. The 2 war horses were stacked on top of each other and were thrown out of the relay station. The warhorse on the right was even smashed 50 to 60 zhang away by the man's fist. It crashed to the ground with a loud bang, causing snow to fly everywhere like willow catkins. Yu Zhang's expression changed drastically. 2 warhorses were stacked on top of each other and were thrown out of the relay station. The warhorse on the right was even smashed 50 to 60 zhang away by the man's fist. Following that, the 3 riders were clearly terrified and wanted to avoid the man's unstoppable momentum. However, they did not have time to do so. One of the riders was quite skilled in horsemanship. In desperation, a violent temperament emerged and he directly urged his horse to crash into the boorish man of Jianghu. Ma Chaowei had already announced that whoever could kill this bandit would be rewarded with 600 taels of silver and a promotion of 3 ranks. Lu Zhang jumped lightly and raised his elbow to smash the horse's head. A tall horse that was charging forward was actually knocked down by the elbow. The rider who was charging forward also took the opportunity to stab the intrepid Lu Zhang in the chest with his spear. However, before he could be pleasantly surprised, he felt a piercing pain from the web between his thumb and index finger. The spear slipped out of his hand. Lu Zhang grabbed the spear with one hand and grabbed the rider's collar with the other, throwing him high into the air like he was grabbing a chick. Then he flicked his wrist and raised the spear. His figure retreated backwards and caught up with the 2 riders who had luckily brushed past him. He then placed the spear horizontally and blocked their path. The 2 warhorses collided with the spear and were actually unable to move forward. The few rows of riders behind them pushed their spears against each other. The charging formation from before was instantly disrupted. Lu Zhang infused internal energy into the spear with both hands and laughed as he stepped forward. The dozen or so riders in front of him clustered together and were thrown off their horses. Lu Zhang did not care about these weak ants. He switched from holding the spear horizontally with both hands to holding it with one hand. A few clever riders on horseback threw their spears. One of the spears was aimed at Lu Zhang's head. The man who was as docile as a domesticated cat and dog in front of the young master with a fan slammed his head forward and directly shattered the spear. He snatched the spear from his hand and swept it diagonally upwards, hitting the rider's waist. The rider's body bent and flew horizontally, rolling into a slightly playful snowball on the snowy ground. Lu Zhang leaped forward. He did not care about spear techniques and only used the spear in his hand as a staff. With a swing of the staff, he sliced a warhorse from its back to its feet and split it in half. The rider sat on the half of the warhorse's corpse on the ground with a dull look in his eyes. Ma Jinchai swallowed her saliva and forced herself to calm down. She did not look at her beloved concubine's pale face and muttered to herself, "This bastard is fierce. We can slowly retreat and then kill him with a sudden thrust." Then, Colonel Ma Jinchai turned her horse around and ran away like a wisp of smoke. On the mountaintop, Su Fengnian turned his head and smiled at Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma. "It seems like our Colonel Ma has welcomed a good start to the new year." Then, he looked at the sneering Colonel Pearl and said in a flat tone, "Huang Shaokai, Ma Jinchai did not want to compete with you for military merits. She clearly put in a lot of effort to show weakness to the enemy and lure them in." The corner of Huang Shaotsai's mouth rose. He said softly, "Colonel Ma's favor, Huang Shaokai appreciates it." "Your Highness?" Su Fengnian nodded. Huang Shaokai rode down the mountain alone. The 300 cavalrymen at the foot of the mountain did not move. The other 300 cavalrymen formed the left, right, middle troops and rushed toward the young master who was slowly waving the peach blossom fan. Yu Zhang looked back and sneered. He did not chase after the defeated frozen field cavalry. When they first charged at him, they were impatient like a hungry man who saw a woman. Now, before he could even warm up, they were already crying for their parents to go home. Yu Zhang threw away the red-tasseled spear that was soaked in the blood of the war horse. He planned to experience the ability of the next cavalry in Bailiang's Lingzhou. In the eyes of this Vajra realm expert, the so-called Bailiang cavalry were all made of tofu. Yu Zhang spat a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground. Yu Zhang could be the king of Bailiang and play around with such small fries. On the mountaintop, Su Fengnian, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, had his hands in his sleeves. Two of his fingers were twirling inside his sleeves as if he was spinning silk from a cocoon. Chapter 956. On the post-house route, the battle with the frozen field cavalry as the main characters had come to an end. Very quickly, there were scouts who passed on the general military information to the Commandant of the Northwest, Ran Chunyun, and the Commandant of the Northwest, Zhu Boyu. The reactions of the two generals were completely different. Dressed in bright red armor, Ran Chunyun stood with a saber at her side. When she heard that Ma Jinchai had suffered a setback, she laughed loudly and stroked her horse's mane with a gloating expression. As generals of the same province, their ranks were similar. Since the official hats on their heads were not too different, then naturally they were enemies. Ran Chunyun, who came from a poor background, had long disliked the laughably named Commandant Ma. Her subordinates were all descendants of Lingzhou's generals, so how could they train elite soldiers? There were two plains on the Lingzhou plains that were easy for cavalry to stretch out and train. Last year, Ran Chunyun had a dispute with Ma Jinchai and fiercely taught the flashy frozen field cavalry a lesson. However, Ma Jinchai quickly turned the tables on Ran Chunyun in the officialdom. The salary was not bad, and no one dared to do anything to this lightning pool. Ran Chunyun only received some leftovers that did not even have B-grade aptitude. Only after asking around did she find out that it was Ma Jinchai's in-law who was an important member of Bailiang's military depot who had set up a stumbling block. Later on, Ma Jinchai brought 100 cavalry with brand new armor to Ran Chunyun's territory to flaunt her might under the pretext of killing roaming bandits. If it were not for Ran Chunyun firmly suppressing the lower generals to not cause trouble, there would have been a mutiny. On the other side, Zhu Boyu was much calmer. His impression of Ma Jinchai had always been bad, but he never showed it on his face. If he really met her, he would drink and be polite. Therefore, the Windcoat cavalry got along quite well with Ma Jinchai and the other young masters. The main reason was that Zhu Boyu was also a military official who had come out of a general's manor. His father's generation had fought side by side, and there was a life-and-death relationship as a foundation. However, although Zhu Boyu had never been to the battlefield at the border and his achievements were rather thin, he was one of the few Bailiang youths who could calm down and manage the army. These years, he held real power and was often mocked by many surplus generals who had returned to Lingzhou with military achievements. This made Zhu Boyu more willing to get along with Ma Jinchai and the others. After all, the fake friendship and toasting was better than those old seniors who did not have any descendants who would show off their seniority the moment they met. Right now, Zhu Boyu was worried that His Royal Highness, who had not started a killing spree in the Lingzhou officialdom, would use this chance to make an example out of Ma Jinchai and drag him down. Why would His Royal Highness care if a Windcoat cavalry without any military achievements was clean and honest or was in cahoots with Ma Jinchai? Zhu Boyu, who had the misfortune of being born with a baby face, sat high on the back of a horse. His warhorse was only AB grade. The Windcoat cavalry only had 30 A-grade warhorses, and they were all given to those who had military achievements and elite soldiers. Zhu Boyu waved his hand and let the scout, who did not need to report based on the rules of the Windcoat cavalry, return to investigate. Zhu Boyu, who was wearing normal armor, let out a breath of air. His expression was abnormally serious because he could see that His Royal Highness had a bodhisattva heart for the Lingzhou officialdom. However, there was a difference between the military and politics. With the example of Huaihua Great General Zhong Hongwu as an example, Zhu Boyu was certain that the troops in Lingzhou would not be so lucky. The peach blossom beauty fan was gently fanned and a gentle breeze blew across his face. The hair on his temples fluttered lightly. The handsome young master in a black fur coat looked over at the same level. The 3 cavalry units that surrounded them in a fan-shaped battle formation were like clouds and mud compared to the previous 200 cavalry units. The hoofs of the horses were in sync and there was no confusion at all. With his outstanding eyesight, he could clearly see the young faces of the cavalry. Their eyes were firm as if they had received instructions and did not have any intention of using the light crossbows. Bailiang had very strict restrictions on crossbows. If one carried a Bailiang knife, they could rely on their family background to get away with it. However, if one dared to carry a crossbow, even if it was an inch-long crossbow, which was a weak light crossbow that a maiden could use, once discovered, their family would be confiscated on the same day. There was no room for negotiation. The movement sprinted wildly on the post road. The straight line under his feet splattered mud in all directions. It was frightening. The Vajra realm martial artist, who was tired of being a lackey, only wanted to do whatever he could to his heart's content. In his eyes, the 200 cavalrymen who could not withstand a single blow from him were frail little girls who needed to be supported. The 200 to 300 cavalrymen in front of him were nothing more than slightly stronger and sturdier women, who could not withstand a few blows from him. The first pin expert, whose personality did not match his name, laughed loudly as he charged forward. 3 iron spears pierced toward him at the same time. Lu Zhang grabbed 2 cold spears with both hands and twisted them into 2 lumps of iron. He pulled his wrists inward and then knocked them outward. The 2 cavalrymen who refused to let go were knocked off their horses by him. The spear in the middle was aimed at Lu Zhang's chest, but it did not pierce through. Instead, the burly man with a smile on his face continued to charge forward. The spear that pierced downwards curved in an exaggerated arc in the air. It was obvious that this cavalryman's strength and tenacity were not comparable to Ma Jinchai's troops. As an outstanding martial artist who could occupy a place among the small group of people at the top of Jianghu, Lu Zhang did not care if the ant under his feet bit him lightly or heavily. He bent his knees and crawled under the belly of a horse. He lifted a galloping warhorse with one shoulder. Like an overlord carrying a cauldron, Lu Zhang threw the warhorse to the back of the cavalryman. The few cavalrymen who were caught in the crossfire fell to the ground and could not get up. However, they were quickly pulled up by the cavalrymen who had bypassed the dead warhorses. 2 of their comrades rode on the same horse and fiercely thrust their spears at Lu Zhang, who was completely invulnerable. Lu Zhang, who was finally somewhat interested, laughed wildly. He suddenly rose from the ground and stepped on a cavalryman's head. Then, he took advantage of the situation and moved left and right, stepping on the cavalrymen and warhorses one by one. In an instant, more than a dozen cavalrymen had completely lost their ability to fight. Lu Zhang seemed to be still not satisfied. After landing on the ground, he was too lazy to attack. He only focused on charging forward. Wherever he went, the warhorses' bones were broken and they died after violent collisions. Chapter 957. The cavalry formation was quickly penetrated by Yu Zhang, but Yu Zhang did not stay idle. The cavalry on the left saw the situation and did not charge recklessly under the command of their leader. Instead, they continued to lead the cavalry and threw their spears one after another. Most of the spears that pierced Yu Zhang's body either slipped or fell on the road, while some that did not pierce Yu Zhang were nailed into the frozen ground. Yu Zhang wanted to tease Bailiang and let them see his Vajra physique, so he stood still. After the spear forest, the cavalry on the right followed up with a rain of arrows. Yu Zhang's body was completely unharmed except for his tattered clothes. Although Yu Zhang seemed to be careless, he was in fact silently accumulating strength, trying to climb to the peak in one go before the battle. It was not that he could not continue to tease a group of rats, but it was better to be safe than sorry. If there was a martial arts master hidden in the cavalry and he attacked when Yu Zhang's chi was weakened, although he would not be defeated, if he lost even a little bit of face, who knew if the vicious young master behind him would vent his anger on him when he was bored? Serving this young master was more tiring than serving his ancestors. His heart was filled with hatred. If he could have a higher realm than that handsome young man, Lu Zhang, who had always scoffed at famous scholars, would not mind changing his taste. But Yu Zhang knew very well that this kind of ruthless revenge, which made him feel comfortable, was not something he could count on in this life. Unless that person was suddenly beaten to the ground by an immortal, then he would have the chance to kick him when he was down. However, the northern Liang path had already produced the old god of swords Li Chungang, and Chen Jibao had already defected to the capital. Only the junior brother of the spear immortal Wang Xiao and Yuan Zuozong, who was the commander of the border cavalry, were left. Could these 2 top masters still join hands and appear here? Although the 100-man cavalry on the courier road had been pierced through, they quickly resumed their charge. At the foot of the mountain, 100-man cavalry under Huang Xiaokuai's personal command had also joined the battle. The 100-man cavalry on the left and right sides of the mountain switched between crossbows and javelins. Even though they were unable to achieve anything against a Vajra realm expert, their formation was tight and their performance was far better than Ma Jinchai's frozen field cavalry. The fearless Yu Zhang let out a long breath, the fog lingering around him. He stretched out his arms and twisted his wrist joints. As if he was annoyed by the noise of the horse's hooves, he stomped on the ground, the dull rumbling sound faintly covering the sound of the hooves. Yu Zhang stomped on the road, the momentum gradually growing, rumbling like thunder. The horses on the road rose and fell more violently, but still, no one was afraid of the battle. The political strife in northern Liang, especially the strife in the military, had always been disdained by the pillars of the imperial court of Liang as a farce in the countryside. If they could not gain the upper hand in the argument, they would roll up their sleeves and start a brawl. Compared to the imperial court in the capital, where the imperial court's imperial edicts had been passed down for generations, how could northern Liang, which had been built in just 20 years, catch the eye of the imperial court's big shots? However, it seemed that many of the pillars of the imperial court had forgotten that the Liang imperial court had the cultural heritage of the Bailiang cavalry. The impoverished Bailiang also had the unique heritage of the Bailiang cavalry. Dong Yueqi was not a good cavalry, but people like Wang Ji, Ren Chunyun, Zhu Boyu, Huang Xiaokuai, and so on, who were not even qualified to be seen by the pillars of the imperial court, were all doing well. Yu Zhang wanted to break a few spines of Bailiang with his own hands. Of course, he did not know about the heritage of the torch and was too lazy to think too much about it. However, the cavalry in front of him was different from the others. He felt very uncomfortable. It was not easy for him to become a level 1 expert, but in the end, he had to work like a cow or a horse for a junior. Now that he was in Bailiang, he had to vent his anger. Yu Zhang stared at the cavalry general who was wearing colorful armor and had unsheathed his cold saber. Yu Zhang's vigorous qi filled his entire body. He felt like he could take a sword from an immortal. Yu Zhang's spirit was at its peak. His wild laughter echoed throughout the post house as he collided with the cavalry general. When they were 50 steps apart, he leaped up high, stretched out his long arms and punched down. The Bailiang commandant, Huang Xiaokuai, who was leading the charge, blocked with his saber horizontally. The Bailiang commandant's saber suddenly sank, and the warhorse's hooves were instantly crushed by the unstoppable force of thousands of pounds. The edge of the Bailiang commandant's saber only managed to squeeze out a trace of blood from the man's fist. Huang Xiaokuai held his saber in one hand and the back of his saber in the other, but he was still powerless to stop this Jianghu villain's punch. He swallowed a mouthful of blood and abandoned his horse to move to the side. His saber brushed past the man's fist, but it was still unable to cut the man's skin. The commandant beside him pierced his spear at the same time, accurately aiming for Yu Zhang's left eyeball, forcing him to stop chasing after their commandant. Another commandant threw his spear at Yu Zhang's crotch. This was the first time Yu Zhang frowned. The essence of killing a Vajra realm expert was nothing more than the 4 words, "The truth will come to light." Only after exhausting the qi that flowed endlessly like water, and losing the perfect and flawless invincible Vajra would half the battle be won. If an expert was given enough time to take a breather, slowly replenish the qi and restore the qi in his body, he would have to start all over again. However, the accumulation of an expert's qi was always easier to disperse than to gather. The qi could travel for hundreds of miles in an instant. This legendary realm of Earth immortals was something that even the Vajra realm and Finger Xian realm experts could only dream of. For example, Yu Zhang's qi had fallen to 80% after 2 consecutive attacks. He allowed the rain of arrows and spears to rain down on him without moving an inch, and only managed to recover to 90% using a clumsy method. The reason why the Jianghu people regarded the death of the Sword Emperor of Shishu as a tragic death was not purely because they felt pity for the expert who was crushed into a pile of minced meat. It was more because this grandmaster swordsman, for the sake of his worthless family name, guarded the gates of the imperial city of Shishu all by himself. The enemy he faced was a tide of locust cavalry, and he had no chance to catch his breath at all. He could only rely on his last breath to fight to the death. It was as if he was watching himself walk step by step on the road to the underworld. However, Yu Zhang merely furrowed his brows. He was only facing 100 riders. He casually pushed aside the blinding spear of the commandant, and with a tap of his toes, he stepped on the iron spear thrown by the rider and used the momentum to knee the commandant in the head. Yu Zhang stood on the back of the warhorse. The warhorse continued to gallop forward. Yu Zhang stood proudly on the top of the mountain, and for some reason, he felt a tightness in his chest. A rider was slowly descending the mountain. Faster and faster. Far behind Yu Zhang, the peach blossom fan was closed with a snap. The vermilion rope with the other end of the white scabbard on the young man's wrist was suddenly pulled taut. As the rider descended the mountain, the young man in black sensed that he was being watched by someone on the mountain. He muttered to himself, "Is there such a hidden expert in Bailiang? Why hasn't Zhao Gou's records mentioned him before?" Yu Zhang's scalp went numb, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He was scared out of his wits. The sleeves of the rider fluttered in the wind. From the cuffs of his sleeves to his arms, there were countless red threads coiling around them, as if they were scarlet snakes crawling all over them. In the past, there had been such a red snake cat riding towards Yu Zhang leisurely. Yu Zhang, who had been hit in the ribs, seemed to have gone mad. With a pained expression, he squatted on the back of the horse and hooked his fingers into his scalp. Then he raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. He clenched his teeth and slapped the warhorse to death. Then, he rushed towards the rider. The Pearl cavalry at the foot of the mountain and on the road stopped their horses subconsciously, leaving the rider and the unstoppable unknown Jianghu martial artist to fight. The rider floated down from his horse and continued to move forward. The pair, who had been expected to fight fiercely for a few hours, brushed past each other just like that. His sleeves turned even redder. It turned out that he was holding a bloody human skin that had been peeled from head to toe. The 300 riders on the road widened their eyes in unison as they watched His Highness, who was carrying a fresh bag of skin, pass by. He stopped in front of the young man who was no longer waving his fan and casually tossed the human skin into the air. Huang Xiaokuai would never forget this scene for the rest of his life. His Royal Highness, who had an ordinary Bailiang saber on his waist, was up against the crossing the river that was not inferior to the Nanhua saber. Chapter 958. The two captains of Tongmen Pass looked at each other in dismay. Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma's horizons were much higher than normal soldiers. They were even more shocked by His Royal Highness's method of killing people. The reason why it was called a magnificent feat was because there were usually military experts like Wei Xian hidden among the cavalry. The rule of Jianghu to measure the level of martial arts by the number of armor pieces was actually not accurate. After all, iron armor was a dead object, while the person wearing the armor was a living person with martial arts skills. They also had their own circulation of qi. Wei Shaking glanced at Lingzhou's Deputy General Su Yanbing from the corner of his eyes. This retainer of the king of Bailiang, who was carrying an iron spear without tassels, had urged his horse to take a few steps forward. He looked at the post house in the distance. There were a few strands of light purple flowing light moving around the tip of his spear. On the other hand, the other Deputy General, Han Laozhan, who was always beside them, seemed to be somewhat surprised. He shook the reins of his horse and urged his horse to come to the side of his fellow disciple, Su Yanbing. He asked softly, "What's going on?" Han Laozhan, the mysterious finger, saw clearly what happened on the post house. However, this spear immortal Wang Xiu's junior martial brother was curious as to how His Royal Highness did it. The Jianghu man with the physique of the first stage Vajra realm charged directly at His Royal Highness. In the end, His Royal Highness took a punch head-on. His Royal Highness took the opportunity to let the scarlet snake crawl onto the man's body, like snow melting into the surface of the blazing fire in the furnace. The reason why the Vajra realm was called the unbreakable Vajra realm was because the qi in the body and the physique were tempered. The two merged together seamlessly. His Royal Highness's sleeves were densely covered with scarlet snake-shaped red ropes. In an instant, they blocked the acupoints of the first-stage martial artist's body. In addition, the man did not care about anything else. Not only did he hope to use brute force to break free from the scarlet snake, he also wanted to crush the scarlet snake in one go. The qi in his body, which could be said to be at its peak, was like adding firewood to the furnace. Due to the qi acupoints being blocked, the toughness of the red ropes was far beyond imagination. As a result, the furnace was on the verge of collapse, unable to withstand the boiling water. When the martial artist was on the verge of death and still failed to kill the enemy who was close to him, he finally realized that his qi and physique had been forcibly separated. Finally, he regained some clarity. However, by the time he came to his senses, it was already too late to stop. Before the martial artist died, he indeed had some courage that made Han Laozhan take notice of him. He risked his life and finally smashed out with both fists, one on His Royal Highness's chest and the other on his middle dantian. Even Han Laozhan admitted that he could not be as steady as His Royal Highness. It could be said that the overly conceited martial artist had killed himself. However, His Royal Highness's red ropes and the two supernatural powers that made the fists disappear like clay oxen in the sea were the real key. From an outsider's point of view, the first-stage martial artist did not seem to be a match for His Royal Highness. However, Han Laozhan was well aware of the treacherous nature of the situation. Su Yanbing had been staring at the young master fanning himself the entire time. He said calmly, "Laozhan, you don't know this. When Li Chungang taught His Royal Highness the two-sleeve green snake, it was not an armchair strategist. Instead, he actually smashed hundreds of two-sleeved green snakes into His Royal Highness's body, giving His Royal Highness the opportunity to comprehend the essence of the path of the sword on his own. His Royal Highness once told me that at that time, other than learning the sword, he also wanted to polish the great yellow court that the Wudong sect leader had instilled in him. Using His Royal Highness's words, using the two-sleeved green snake to beat himself was not some stone from another mountain to polish jade, but to use the jade of another mountain to polish the stone was somewhat of a reckless waste of natural resources. Later, His Royal Highness had the only remaining great yellow court golden lotus seedling pulled out by the celestial phenomenon expert Lu Haoshi. However, Lu Haoshi had indeed pulled out the seedling's tendons and lotus leaves, but the pond where the purple gold lotus was cultivated and nurtured was still there. Most importantly, the roots were still there. His Royal Highness said that with his internal energy alone, no matter how hard he cultivated, he would not be able to make the decaying roots grow again. It was only after he had lost the Great Yellow Court that he learned of the old sect leader Wang Zhongluo's gift. The Great Yellow Court cultivation that was close to the celestial phenomenon level of internal energy was secondary. The unremarkable pond was the most precious. It was like a lotus pond. The scene of the lotus spreading across the surface of the water was very beautiful. However, without the pond, there would be no way to talk about the scene of the lotus growing out of the mud without being tainted. Therefore, on this trip, he once again used the stupid method of using a stone from another mountain to polish jade. He used the shady business of using an external force to stir up the muddy water in the pond. For this reason, His Royal Highness suffered quite a few beatings along the way. I don't know how His Royal Highness found out that the boorish man of the pugilistic world had a grudge with Han Diaosi, so he purposely used the human cat's trick to provoke him into attacking with all his might. The fiercer the attacks of a first-grade martial artist, the more beneficial it is for His Royal Highness. As for why His Royal Highness is so proficient in skinning the human cat, I don't know either. Han Laozhan lamented, although it is beneficial to one's cultivation, every punch is on the flesh. Moreover, it is the final struggle of a Vajra realm expert. It is not easy to hit him. Su Yanbing smiled and said, to His Royal Highness, he is already used to it and calls it a common occurrence. Moreover, no matter how painful it is still better than the two-sleeved green snake that the old god of swords, Li Chungang, casually threw out back then. Wei Shaking moved closer and asked cautiously, General Su, is the pugilistic world expert who died in the hands of His Royal Highness really a first-grade expert? Su Yanbing nodded and said with a calm expression, how many experts have died in the hands of His Royal Highness? Wei Shaking secretly swallowed his saliva and didn't dare to say another word. Han Laozhan asked, then His Royal Highness is going to have another battle with that self-proclaimed romantic young man? Su Yanbing shook his head and said slowly, among the 4 realms of the first grade, only the Vajra realm is suitable for tempering one's physique. Any higher and it is very likely that the gains will not make up for the losses. That young man is already at the Finger Mystery realm. Laozhan, you are also at the Finger Mystery realm. You should know that the Finger Mystery realm of a pugilistic martial artist is vastly different from the first-grade Finger Mystery realm of a Taoist Junren. In terms of the degree of fierceness in killing people, the same realm is like a capital official and a local high-ranking official of the same rank. The actual authority in the hands of the latter far surpasses the former. How can a 4th-grade official of a low-ranking government office in the capital have more authority to kill than the governor of a local county? Among the 4 realms, the Finger Mystery realm is neither high nor low, but it has the most number of secret techniques. Unless it is an earthly immortal or a celestial phenomenon realm expert, no one would dare to say that they can win against an unfamiliar Finger Mystery realm expert. Today, even if His Royal Highness wants to personally test the background of that person, I, Su Yanbing, will also intervene. The Su Fengnian of Jianghu can take the risk, but His Royal Highness of Bailiang can't. Han Laozhan smiled and said, that's good. Otherwise, if that guy is really killed by His Royal Highness, those military officers won't have anything to do. We can't let these officials come here and eat the northwest wind. On the Post Road. Chapter 959. Putting away his folding fan, the young master who had his crossing the river knife pulled on the reins and lightly dodged the bloody human skin. Indifferent to the movement's sudden death, he smiled and said, Han Shangxian can kill celestial phenomenon with 1 finger. It's not unusual for a 2nd class to kill a 1st class. He saw that Su Fengnian was expressionless and didn't seem to be interested in talking to him, so he was happy to talk to himself. But that's not surprising, but it's very surprising that you're proficient in the art of skinning human cats. I just don't know if you know the last two realms of scraping bones and pulling out tendons. He turned his wrist, and Bai Chao, who was pulled along by the long rope, spun around as he looked down at the Prince of Bailiang who had come alone. Zhao Guo had a confidential file specially collected for His Royal Highness, which was only slightly thinner than Chao Chongqing's in the Heavenly Archive Room. He had casually flipped through it earlier, and it had truly broadened his horizons. Han Diaoxi, who was said to have died of an illness in the Imperial Palace, had actually been killed by the young man in front of him with a flying sword outside godly Martial City. Logically speaking, Su Fengnian's realm had plummeted after Master Lu Hao's beating, so it wasn't too difficult for him to kill a movement at the Vajra realm, but it also wasn't easy. The crux of the matter was how this Su fellow had obtained the unusual finger mystic realm of human cats. He didn't believe that there was anyone else in the world who had been lucky enough to comprehend the finger mystic realm's looking glass technique, which was known as pointing straight to the heart of heaven. Not only did it have a photographic memory, it could also extract the essence. The reason why the female sword attendant in the Wu family sword mound, the one who carried the Su of Gojoseon on her back, could steal sword techniques and sword intent, no matter how obscure they were, was more of an instinct that only happened once in 100 years. However, she was limited to stealing other people's sword techniques, and was still a little inferior to Zhang Ding's ability to accept everything. If this Su fellow had the same aptitude as Zhang Ding, then Zhang Ding really wouldn't be able to eat or sleep in peace. Since ancient times, one mountain couldn't accommodate two tigers, even if this mountain was the entire Jianghu. The Jianghu was indeed very big, but Zhang Ding was very narrow-minded and couldn't tolerate any potential opponent who had the chance to stand side by side with him. Earlier, Zhang Ding had seen Su fellow kill Yu Zhang very clearly. First, it was Dong Tai's flying sword pinning technique, then it was Han Diaoxi's skinning technique. Both of them were top killing techniques in the world. Yu Zhang's attacks were completely disorganized and he tried to kill Zhang Ding with a single blow using his Vajra realm physique. How could there be such a good thing in the world? However, Zhang Ding didn't find this strange. Yu Zhang had just entered the first-rank state and was immediately scared out of his wits by Han Diaoxi. Since then, he had been as timid as a mouse and had never fought with a master of the same level. Therefore, it was definitely not good to be reckless in the Jianghu, but it was also not good to be overly concerned with one's cultivation and thus cherish one's life too much. Zhang Ding raised his wrist and twirled the red string of his saber with 2 fingers. The crossing the river was still spinning as he bent down to look at Su Fengnian. There's an extremely powerful master at the top of the mountain. I definitely can't beat him, and even if I wanted to escape, I might not be able to escape alive. However, you and I are about the same age and background. You, Su Fengnian, can be considered a noble family, but I'm not bad either. Those dukes and marquises of Zhulu Mountain are also people who occupy mountains and call themselves kings. However, in terms of seniority, they still have to call me martial granduncle or something. Therefore, in the so-called Jianghu of Yu Zhang and the others, there's no one with a better background than me. How about it? Do you dare to fight me to the death? Don't worry, even if I can kill you, I won't. I still want to live well and go to Bailiang's frontier fortress to experience Baimang's desert scenery. Su Fengnian, Bailiang is your territory. It's up to you whether you want to fight or not. If you dare, I'll accompany you to the end. If you lose, I'll give you this crossing the river pawn in my hand. If you don't dare and want to be a coward, I'll immediately turn around and run. Su Fengnian laughed. I dare, but no matter how powerful you are, you're only at the level of the 5th raccoon. Compared to a human cat, you're a long way off. However, whether you dare or not is one thing, whether you want to or not is another. You should run. I'll give you the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. After that, Lingzhou's deputy general, Han Laozhan, will lead the troops to suppress the bandits. Oh, let me tell you, you've been appointed by the imperial court to weave official documents and court bulletins. I estimate that very soon, you'll reach the prince's mansion and the administrator's residence at the same time. However, I'll pretend I didn't see you. I'll say this first. While you're on the run, I won't count if you hurt anyone, but if you kill any soldier, I'll make you lose an arm. If you can make any cavalry throw away their armor, I'll remember your kindness. Zhang Fuding didn't panic even though his amulet was so easily torn away. He straightened up on his horse and smiled. I heard you went with Li Chungang to Guangling River. How come I didn't see you learn the old god of swordsmanship? You're quite despicable. Su Fengnian reached out and grabbed the human skin of the movement. He was prepared to hang it on the easternmost city of Lingzhou along with the bones. He wanted to tell the restless foreign Jianghu people what kind of price they had to pay if they wanted to stir up trouble in Beiliang. Outside Shenwu City, Su Fengnian had not only collected some humans, cats, and a few remaining red snakes, but he had also collected some secrets from the skull. Among them was the Vajra movement of Mount Zhulu, who was in charge of waiting for rabbits to find out. Su Fengnian expressionlessly raised the human skin. Jiang Fuding suddenly shook his wrist and tightly gripped this pawn that had never appeared in the Jianghu. After Jiang Fuding made this murderous move, Su Yanbing also raised his spear at the top of the mountain. Finally, Jiang Fuding laughed loudly, his thick killing intent dissipating. Su Fengnian, don't force yourself. Since you've been beaten up badly by the movement, spit out blood if you want to. Don't suffer because you want to save face. Su Fengnian smiled. There's only half an incense stick left. Jiang Fuding smiled. That's not right. There should be half an incense stick left. Su Fengnian said calmly, my incense stick is different from yours. Jiang Fuding sighed and loosened the red rope. The famous blade in its white scabbard hung from it. He stared deeply at this guy, then silently turned his horse around. He was confident that he could win against Su Yanbing, but even if he killed him, he would die at the hands of the master on the mountaintop. It was not worth it. His life was much more valuable than that of the crown prince of Beiliang. A voice suddenly came from behind him. Leave the blade. You don't deserve it anyway. With his back to Su Fengnian, the young man in the black robe looked gloomy, as if he was hesitating whether or not to use the blade. In the end, Jiang Fuding did not turn around. With a shake of his wrist, he broke the red rope, grabbed the pawn, and threw it to the back of his head. Su Fengnian's pupils contracted, and his body did not move an inch. The spear on the mountaintop streaked across the sky, hitting the seemingly slow and leisurely falling blade. There was lightning in the square inch. A huge ravine was blasted open on the road. The momentum of the blade, which contained evil intentions, was shattered by the spear, and it happened to fall on top of Su Fengnian's head. Su Fengnian reached out to take the white scabbard blade and wrapped the human skin in the scabbard. After the dust settled, the horse was still there, but that person was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 960. Once Jiang Fuding left, the peregrine falcons in the sky and the scouts on the ground also moved. Huang Xiaokuai led the Pearl Cavalry in pursuit to the east. Among them was Han Laozhan, who oversaw. The military orders were quickly passed to the northern commandant Ren Chunyun and the Fengqiu commandant Zhu Boyu. Su Fengnian gave Yu Zhang's skin and bones to a few retainers to be sent to the easternmost part of Beiliang's road, Fengxi City. When he slowly reached the top of the mountain, the frozen field commandant Ma Jinchai brushed past the Pearl Cavalry. He brought a few personal guards and retainers with him to the top of the mountain. By the time he reached the top of the mountain, he was already panting. Seeing His Royal Highness, who had a blade at his waist and a blade in his hand, about to enter the carriage, he quickly dismounted and knelt to beg for forgiveness. Based on Ma Jinchai's past personality, if His Royal Highness had not killed one person and driven the other away, and if the master and servant had not tried to kill him, he would have been too lazy to go up and be scolded. He would have just left the mess to his family's elders to deal with. His Ma family, from his grandfather's generation to his father's generation, all had military achievements. They were all old generals who had contributed greatly to the Su family. He, Ma Jinchai, did not believe that His Highness would remove him from his commandant position to the end. Even if His Highness was so unreasonable, with Ma Jinchai's in-laws with Beiliang's military chief, Yan Wenluan, was there a need to be afraid that he would not be able to make a comeback? However, Ma Jinchai knew that in this encirclement, his frozen field cavalry was at a disadvantage. In the beginning, he wanted to go for wool and come home shorn. Instead, he showed his bare buttocks to His Highness and the two Lingzhou deputy generals. He wanted to come to the top of the mountain to be scolded by His Highness and vent his anger on the spot. His position as a commandant would be kept. Ma Jinchai, who was a descendant of a general, was careless in his management of the army, but he still knew a bit about the rules of the officialdom. Su Fengnian had just raised his foot to sit in the carriage when he heard the frozen field commandant sobbing behind him. He turned around and walked toward Ma Jinchai. Ma Jinchai heard the footsteps and quickly raised his head to take a look. He saw that His Highness's expression was calm. He had heard many rumors about His Highness, so he was not sure about His Highness's temperament. Fortunately, he did not directly reveal his anger. This made Ma Jinchai feel a bit more at ease. He thought that their Ma family indeed had some reputation. Even His Highness had to be careful and not vent his anger on Ma Jinchai. Just as Ma Jinchai thought that he had escaped a disaster, Su Fengnian stepped on Ma Jinchai's fat head. Half of his head smashed into the ground, and he fainted on the spot. The 3 retainers followed the commandant and knelt on the ground. They were dumbstruck from fright. They immediately lowered their gazes and stared at the ground. Their hearts rose and fell. Then they quickly heard the ruthless His Royal Highness say coldly, "Carry this piece of trash away. When he wakes up, tell him that the Frozen Field Cavalry has been disbanded. Including the 3 of you, 600 people will be recorded and will never be employed in the Baelyang army again. If you want to join the army again, you have to use your father's military achievements to offset it. If you don't want to, then be a good-for-nothing son of Ling Zhou for the rest of your life. If you commit a crime in the future, you will all be heavily punished. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Right now, Ma Jinchai is just like you." Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma, who had stayed at the top of the mountain, quietly looked at each other. They both realized that the other party could not laugh. Previously, all of the generals in Lingzhou, big and small, were laughing at the civil officials of Lingzhou, including Li Gongda. Now, the tables had turned. It seemed like the civil officials had a chance to gloat over the general's misfortune. Fortunately, the 2 commandants of Tongmen Pass had always been aloof from the Lingzhou officialdom. They had always been considered by Baelyang as his trusted aides. Otherwise, the 2 of them would probably have a good time eating a pot of hard liquor. The generals of the same province did not have good days. Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma, who held elite troops, could not help but feel a bit of sympathy. Su Fengnian stepped on Ma Jinchai and knocked her out. He then turned to Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma and cupped his fists with a smile. "I'll have to trouble the 2 of you to guard Tongmen Pass. In the future, when Baelyang restructures, you might have to call Commandant Wei and Commandant Xian in terms of official titles. However, the ranks will not change. Furthermore, Tongmen Pass is an important location, so the salaries of the generals will also be increased. If you need superior war horses and military equipment, you can directly ask me." The 2 commandants immediately knelt down to thank him. Not lowering their ranks meant that they would not touch Tongmen Pass. Furthermore, His Highness' verbal promise was real. In the past, if the Lingzhou military officials wanted to fight over war horses and weapons with Yuliangzu on the border, they could not even think about it. Those were all things that were left over from other people's mouths. For example, Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma would occasionally meet up and drink with their colleagues who had returned home after taking leave. Even if they faced those commandants of lower ranks, they still felt inferior. Looking at the situation, His Royal Highness had recently promoted the new Lingzhou provincial governor and His Highness. It was clear that he was telling Baelyang that he did not like Lingzhou's officialdom. However, it seemed that he would only place more importance on Lingzhou's military town. This made Wei Shaking and Xianyin Ma, who hoped to continue climbing the ranks, extremely happy. Su Fengnian purposely left things blank, allowing the 2 commandants to chew on the aftertaste. Sitting in the carriage, it was still Su Yanbing who acted as the coachman to chase after that Jiang Fuding. It was enough to have Han Laozhan, who was at the finger-profound realm, as a stabilizing force. It was not like he was a human cat. An expert at the level of Han Shengxian was roaming around Baelyang. There was no need for him to use Su Yanbing, who had a chance of winning against Hong Jingyan, as a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. He needed to rush north to the border and then meet up with Su Xiao. Pei Nanwei saw that Su Fengnian had an additional white scabbard long saber in his hand and was a little curious. Back then when she was outside, she did not see the scene on the road in detail. Through the rough conversation between the 2 Lingzhou deputy generals and the 2 commandants, she knew that after he went down the mountain, he killed that seemingly unstoppable first-rank Vajra realm expert. Regarding this, Pei Nanwei was not that surprised. Back then, this young man brought 200 cavalry and confronted the old king of Jing and Zhao Heng's 1,000 cavalry. He even dared to raise his spear and kill people in front of the formation. Pei Nanwei shifted her position and sat in a corner. She placed the saber on her knees, and blood seeped out of her 7 orifices. It seemed like it was not easy for him to kill people just now. He waited until there was no one around before revealing his weakness. Pei Nanwei smiled. Was she actually laughing at herself for not being human? However, Su Fengnian mistook it as mocking him. He glanced at her coldly. Pei Nanwei did not mind and asked, "Why don't you go and beat the dog that is down?" Chapter 961. Su Fengnian had only pulled out the river crossing pond by 2 inches, but the interior of the carriage was already filled with a sense of honor. Even Pei Nanwei could not help but take a few more glances. When Su Fengnian unsheathed the river crossing pond, Pei Nanwei felt a chill seeping into her skin. She could not help but wrap her arms around her chest to resist the chill. Probably because he noticed his sorry state from the blade that was as clear as a mirror, Su Fengnian used his sleeve to wipe the blood off his face and tapped the middle of the blade with a finger. Unexpectedly, the river crossing pond did not tilt up like other heavy weapons. Instead, the blade rippled, quietly eliminating the vibrations caused by Su Fengnian's finger tapping. In the eyes of outsiders, the river crossing pond looked like an extremely arrogant and beautiful woman, unmoved by all the flattery of men. When Su Fengnian mentioned the river crossing pond, it was almost in front of his eyes. Only then did he realize that the blade was engraved with complicated and obscure talisman cloud patterns, like the rolling clouds, full of vitality. The eye-opening Su Fengnian could not help but sigh. This blade is alive. Pei Nanwei was really sarcastic this time. She laughed and asked, "Is there still an object in this world that can move His Royal Highness?" Su Fengnian did not turn his head. He stared at the enchanting scenery floating on the blade and calmly said, "Aren't there 2 in the carriage?" The river crossing pond was one, and the other was naturally her, Pei Nanwei. Pei Nanwei sneered, "This little girl is really honored." Su Fengnian put the blade back into its sheath and laughed. "You're a little girl? You're a woman in your early 30s. If you got married and had children in the countryside, you might have become a grandmother by now." These words, when placed in the Jianghu where men and women fought against each other, were no different from the killing power of a sword immortal. As expected, Pei Nanwei was so angry that her chest trembled slightly. She pressed one hand on her chest and the other hand on her thigh, trying to calm her emotions. She smiled sweetly, "Look at how much blood you've lost. If I weigh it, it must be several kilograms, right? Does it hurt?" Su Fengnian, who was leaning against the carriage, did not say anything. He stretched out 2 fingers and pinched her thigh. Pei Nanwei's eyebrows knitted together, but she did not make a sound. Su Fengnian loosened his fingers. Pei Nanwei heaved a sigh of relief. She did not expect Su Fengnian to repeat his old trick. Pei Nanwei sucked in a breath of cold air. Her dignified and gentle face, which made this Princess Jing, and become one of the most beautiful women in the world, looked very painful. Su Fengnian seemed to be addicted. He repeated it several times until Pei Nanwei, who did not say anything to stop him, became numb. Her hatred for him could not be any greater. To this young man, who she wanted to cut into pieces, she, Pei Nanwei, was indeed the same as the famous white sheath saber that was snatched from other people's hands. They were both objects that were snatched because they were moved. When they were bored, they would play with it. When they were not free, they would put it back into the sheath and not even look at it, leaving it to be covered in dust. Su Fengnian finally stopped deliberately letting Pei Nanwei suffer this kind of physical pain. Needless to say, her slender thigh was already bruised and swollen. Su Fengnian switched to his palm and placed it on her thigh. Pei Nanwei's pain was like a spring breeze that melted the snow. However, this made Pei Nanwei feel even more humiliated as a plaything. She bit her lips until her thin lips were bleeding. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "The first time will be very painful. Later on it will be nothing more than that. You asked me if it hurts when I bleed from my 7 orifices. In fact, it's the same reason as you. When I say these things, you most likely won't listen, so I can only let you feel it. How about it, now that you know that it doesn't hurt, you already feel that it is a kind of happiness? That's why, we are all cheap goods. We don't know the good fortune of standing and talking." I once heard a joke, saying that the poor commoners wondered whether the old emperor would eat scallion pancakes for every meal. They thought it was funny. When I first traveled the Jianghu, I only realized that being able to fill my stomach when I ate those cornbread and roasted sweet potatoes. I was so happy that I didn't even think about those delicacies. A person's happiness and suffering are different depending on where they live, but the depth is roughly the same. That's why no one should look down on anyone. No one should laugh at anyone. Anything can be fought for, but the place of reincarnation is something that no matter how hard you work, you can't fight for in this lifetime. When encountering injustice, Being able to accept one's fate is a skill, and being able to put your life on the line is even more amazing. However, those who are unwilling to accept their fate and are willing to put their life on the line are also not good, because they often do things without a bottom line and like to harm others. Yuan Tingshan, who rose to the top in Jizhou, is one such example. I've seen all kinds of people at the bottom of the Jianghu, and I've seen all kinds of people at the top of Mount Qingliang. I've never liked to associate with those who don't have a bottom line. Pei Nanwei sneered. If you weren't the hereditary heir of Bailiang, who would be willing to exchange pleasantries with you? Don't even talk about flattery. It's only because you reincarnated well that you have the qualifications to say these things. For the first time, Su Fengnian didn't refute, and grunted in agreement. However, not only did Pei Nanwei not have the feeling of returning victorious, she actually felt somewhat dull. The heir of the king of Jing and, Zhao Sun, was undoubtedly one of those who reincarnated well, but so what? Su Fengnian suddenly asked, I'm going to take a trip to the desolate border that borders Beimang. Do you want to see the desert scenery? I've been to Beimang before, and I've seen the clouds fall with my own eyes. It's like the sky and the earth are aligned. It's really not bad. Seeing this, one's state of mind can also be a bit more open. In the northernmost part of Yuzhou, there's also a mountain called Rooster Crow. When day and night alternate, the sand sounds like a rooster crowing in the morning. Pei Nanwei didn't directly answer, but asked in passing, You're going to the border to participate in the military parade? What? Has the great general already begun to prepare for you to be the hereditary heir of the king of Bailiang? He's afraid that you won't be able to convince the masses, so he's going to personally hold the line for you in the Bailiang border army? As soon as these words came out, Pei Nanwei was as silent as a cicada in winter. She wasn't afraid of the young man beside her, who she had the confidence to be on equal footing with, but from the bottom of her heart, she was afraid of the old man with a hunched back and a smile whenever she bumped into him in Bailiang Palace. That old man was old, but Pei Nanwei still couldn't imagine when and where the old man would die. If the old man finally died, would the fallen 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn be able to close their eyes in peace? Su Fengnian silently left the carriage, requested a warhorse from Tongmen Pass, and rode it alone. Would a Bailiang without Su Shao still be a Bailiang? At this time, a simple carriage quietly entered the desolate border of Beimang, which had been trampled by the Bailiang cavalry. The coachman was the second most powerful person in the world, Tuoba Bodhisattva. Chapter 962. Winter passed and spring came. Orioles sang among hundreds of birds. Flocks of small orioles could often be seen shuttling among the green grasses on both sides of the posthouse road in Yuzhou. Unfortunately, Bailiang had a rough folk culture, and there were no scholars who would go to listen to orioles singing yellow opera in spring. A carriage was moving slowly northward. A woman in the carriage was holding an oriole's nest that she picked from a low branch. Occasionally, she would lift the curtain to take a look at the scenery along the way. Along the way, in order to save time, she seldom stopped in the city. She was in the middle of nowhere, and the most embarrassing thing for a woman was that she had 3 urgent needs. The first time she wanted to go to the toilet, she clenched her legs and gritted her teeth to hold on for half an hour. However, the man, who had long sensed that something was wrong, didn't say anything. When she finally couldn't hold it anymore and asked to get off the carriage, she lowered her head and sat back in the carriage. She even heard a bad joke from the man. He said that there was once an official who dressed incognito to observe the public's opinion, but his stomach felt uncomfortable in the wilderness. Every time he wanted to go to the toilet, he asked the coachman to find a quiet place for him to take off his pants. The coachman found several places for the official, but every time the official untied his belt and squatted down, he didn't want to go there anymore. Later, whenever the official asked if he had found a place, the coachman said no. Finally, the official couldn't stand it anymore, so he jumped off the carriage and took off his pants while running. In the end, he even added fuel to the fire by asking her if she had found a place with good feng shui. On the way back, she had conveniently picked up a bird's nest made of pine needles and grass. After hearing his words, she threw it at him fiercely. The man gently caught the bird's nest with one hand and handed it back to her with a smile. He made up for his mistake by telling her an embarrassing story. He said that when he was traveling, he accidentally went to the toilet and heard a lot of noise next door. He was bored to death, so he opened his mouth to tease his brother a few times. In the end, his toilet door was torn down by a female hero with a cold face with a sword. He was so scared that he almost fell into the toilet pit. He quickly covered his crotch with his hands. In the end, the female hero coldly threatened to cut off his 3 legs. This motherfastress cur really is a loose tongue. If he hadn't been quick-witted and suddenly let go of his hand, letting that heroine have a good look at what it means to have a great display of masculinity, scaring her away, he probably wouldn't have been able to avoid a good beating. Pei Nanwei didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw him say these shameful words. She didn't argue with him anymore. Even the heir apparent of Baelyong was so embarrassed. She, a woman who was no longer the princess consort of a vassal state, was too lazy to pretend to be a heroine. On this trip north to the border, peregrine falcons had been constantly passing on secret reports. Naturally, Su Fengnian did not tell her the important military information, but he did tell her all the harmless secrets. For example, the Qingqing Prince Wu Lingsu of the Qingyang Palace had entered the capital to be conferred a title. He had been given half a cup of the Taoist Master's Mansion's Minister of Feather Dress and was able to rule across the river. He had great power and was in charge of the North and South Taoist schools together. The high and mighty Longhu Mountains seemed to be unable to bear such grievances and quickly took out their trump card. It was said that their leader Zhao Donxia had cultivated the most difficult Jade Emperor Tower in Taoism and ascended together with the old Taoist master Zhao Shi. Then the imperial court immediately allowed Prime Minister Qingci Zhao Danping in the capital to be the leader of the Southern Taoist sect. They also made an exception and granted the young Taoist master of the Taoist master's residence, Zhao Ningxin, to be an official in the imperial court. He became the emperor's personal attendant who was even more envied than Huang Men. There was another thing that had nothing to do with the imperial court. It was purely a matter of Jianghu people. The nameless old swordsman who was addicted to eating swords finally made a move. However, it wasn't Wang Xianji of the martial emperor city who did it himself. Instead, he let his 4 direct disciples block the sword one by one. The first 3 disciples who were recognized as geniuses were unable to block the sword. In the end, the eldest disciple, Yu Groom, who had always been hidden by his junior brother, blocked the sword with his saber. This shocked Zhang Hu. This sabersman was immediately regarded as a top master who could make General Gu Jiantang fight with all his strength. Pei Nanwei didn't have the slightest interest in these secrets that made the blood of all Jianghu people boil. They went in one ear and out the other. She just took it as a joke to relieve her boredom. When they were close to the frontier fortress, the carriage stopped for a while in Qingshan County. Su Fengnian specially took Pei Nanwei to a restaurant to eat a local dish called green essence rice, which was made by crushing the leaves of nanju, soaking the rice in its juice and steaming it. It was green in color and had a tempting aroma. However, the large blue and white porcelain bowl used to hold the rice was almost a foot wide, which made Pei Nanwei stunned. She went all out and ate less than half of the bowl before she couldn't swallow it. Su Fengnian finished his own bowl like a whirlwind in clouds and took Pei Nanwei's bowl without hesitation. He still enjoyed the meal with relish. Su Yanbing didn't enter the restaurant earlier. When he showed up later, he was accompanied by a middle-aged man in satin casual clothes. Su Fengnian, who was still eating with his head lowered, waved his hand and motioned for the strange-looking man to sit down. After the man sat down, he said softly, "Greetings to His Royal Highness." Su Fengnian put down his empty bowl and chopsticks and leaned lazily against the back of the crudely made and slightly rugged chair. He joked with a smile, "Huang Fucheng, what are you calling me? I've already changed from Commandant Gui Yi to General Yu Zhou, who is in charge of the military power of a province. Are you still used to it?" Huang Fucheng, who was already the new general of Yu Zhou, didn't have the fear and modesty of an ordinary general. He only said in a deep voice, "I dare not disappoint your highness even if I have to die 10,000 times." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Chen Shiliang is in charge of the salt policy. If he doesn't ask you for help, you don't have to think too highly of yourself and let those unrestrained local tyrants do whatever they want. When Chen Shiliang asks you to borrow soldiers to kill someone, you can take action. At that time, don't be soft-hearted." Huang Fucheng's speed of promotion in the northern Liang path was second only to the provincial governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji. He was fully deserving of being His Highness' trusted aide. However, the price he had to pay was so great that it made one's heart turn cold. He had to watch his entire clan die out. Huang Fucheng, who was so obsessed with being an official that he went crazy, naturally had a good reputation in the officialdom of Yuzhou. However, Huang Fucheng was fighting with his back to the wall in Baelyong. No one was willing to sit at the same table with such a treacherous villain even if he wanted to form a clique. This kind of puppet was most suitable to be used as a borrowed knife to kill people. It could be said that whoever used him would feel relieved. However, in Bailiang, only Su Fengnian was qualified to hold a knife. The more you talk, the more mistakes you make. In addition, Huang Fucheng had always believed in using meritorious deeds to exchange for official positions. Even if he had a meteoric rise, he still gave people the illusion that he was unhappy. Su Fengnian didn't care whether this general of Yuzhou had eaten or not. He still ordered a bowl of green rice for him and said with a smile, "You've integrated the Jianghu forces in Yuzhou well. My sister has a good opinion of you. I'll allow you to generously extend your hands and feet to Liangzhou in the future. By the way, you'll pay for the meal. I'll take it that you've done your duty as a host." Huang Fucheng stood up and respectfully saw His Royal Highness off. After sitting down, he wolfed down the rice. In the end, he took out all the gold and silver in the restaurant's waiter's eyes, which looked at him like he was an idiot. He placed them on the table and swaggered away. His duty as a host. He had bought the military power of the entire Yuzhou with the gold and silver he carried with him. Was it expensive or cheap? The carriage drove out of Qingshan County City. Su Fengnian lay comfortably in the carriage, crossing his legs and burping. Pei Nanwei sneered and said, "Isn't this notorious Huang Fucheng the person you said has no bottom line? Aren't you also comfortable using him?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "How do you know he has no bottom line? Huang Fucheng, and even Chu Lushan, are actually not as simple as the outside world thinks. Naturally, they have nothing to do with good people. But when it comes to whether they have a bottom line or not, in my opinion, they have a much higher bottom line than those talkative and famous scholars who keep saying that they are worried about the country and the people while having sex with prostitutes. Those who regard themselves too much as human beings will easily not regard others as human beings. Those who do not regard themselves as human beings will, on the contrary, leave a little bit of a pure heart. To make an inappropriate comparison, Mount Wudong and Mount Longhu are both Taoist ancestral courts. The Taoist master's mansion's yellow-purple noble lady is full of immortal aura, so high and unapproachable that only high-ranking officials and dignitaries can walk through that door. The old Taoist with the highest seniority on Mount Wudong does not have any immortal aura, but he can chat with the common people and pilgrims about their daily lives. Who do you think is more humane? Huang Fucheng is my lackey. Whether it's me, His Royal Highness, or Huang Fucheng himself, we won't deny it. But if Huang Fucheng really wants this Yuzhou general to pour out his grievances, you won't have the heart to listen. Pei Nanwei flatly said, "I don't want to hear it either." Su Fengnian sighed and said, "Every family has its own difficulties. Only Qing Feng, who flips through books for no reason, knows about it." Pei Nanwei was stunned. She laughed and said, "I didn't know that you would also be sad about the passing of spring." Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, "I'm a talented scholar who can write hundreds of poems in a year, okay?" Pei Nanwei squinted and said, "Buying poems and copying poems counts?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "If I didn't spend a lot of money to buy these poems of Bailiang's poor scholars, do you think they would have enough money to travel thousands of miles to the capital to take the imperial examination?" Pei Nanwei asked in return, "Has anyone ever said good things about you and remembered your kindness?" Su Fengnian's mouth twitched. There was a rare awkwardness on his face. "It's probably because I didn't hear it." Pei Nanwei sneered and said, "Moreover, Bailiang is barren and the number of scholars is even fewer. In the end, you gave them all to the imperial court with both hands. You, His Royal Highness, are really magnanimous." Su Fengnian rubbed his stomach, which could fill 2 big blue and white bowls of rice, and said self-mockingly, "My magnanimity is not small. But good people have good karma. Didn't nearly 1,000 foreign scholars come to Bailiang to take root?" Chapter 963. To the north of Qingan County in Yuzhou was Yanji County. The reason why it was called Yanji County was that Yanji County's wives were famous for their beauty. Even in the Central Plains, some rich old men in Jiangnan Circuit would take pride in marrying a young woman from Yanji County as a concubine. Most of the beautiful women from Yanji County, who were unwilling to suffer hardships, preferred to leave the border for the rich and fertile Central Plains, never to return. Even though many of them had fallen into prostitution, they would never turn back. Thus they were mocked by the Liang imperial court as flowers in the wall, fragrance outside the wall. There was another Yanji County with the same name in Yanji County, which was full of beautiful women. It was a man's good fortune to marry a Yanji County woman and bring her home to warm his bed. If an official in Yuzhou didn't have a Yanji County woman as a concubine or a concubine, he wouldn't have the face to go out and greet his colleagues. Pei Nanwei might have been tired of wearing that cumbersome curtain hat. When she entered the inn in Yanji County to spend the night, she abandoned the curtain hat and was shocked by the men and women who were lucky enough to recognize her face. Today was the Lantern Festival of the first year of Xiangfu. The Lantern Festival was a big festival. Officials and people enjoyed it together and went out to enjoy the lanterns together. Yuzhou was obviously very different from Lingzhou, which had a granary. Although the lantern market was lively, it didn't have a glorious aura. Men and women's clothes were also mostly simple, unlike Lingzhou, which liked to be luxurious. Yuzhou was neither Liangzhou where the Su family lived nor Lingzhou, which was relatively stable and comfortable. Yuzhou had always been mocked by the officials of Yuzhou as being raised by a stepmother. Of course, they didn't forget to bring 1 or 2 Yanji County women who were bought with a lot of money. As a stepping stone for the unfamiliar official career, it was tacky to give money. If they gave too little, they would be looked down on. Giving women was both elegant and practical. Su Fengnian and Pei Nanwei walked side by side. They looked like a perfect couple. In the night, they could only see Pei Nanwei's face from afar. Therefore, they didn't cause too much of a stir. However, those who had seen her face and figure didn't want to go too far away. If she wasn't in their bowl, they could take a few more glances at her bowl to satisfy their craving. Some idle ruffians were quite bold. They wanted to take advantage of the crowd to take advantage of her. However, they were kicked far away by Su Fengnian. They were just shrimps who looked fierce but were timid at heart. They were angry but didn't dare to say anything. Furthermore, they were in the wrong first. After that they became much more restrained. Originally, they wanted to pretend to call for people to gang up on the child. However, no one was willing to take a few more glances at the beautiful woman on the mural. Therefore, they gave up bitterly. In addition, in Yuzhou, the government would turn a blind eye to fights. However, if they made trouble in the lantern market, they would definitely be caught and skinned by the patrolling soldiers. There were 3 scholars walking in front of Su Fengnian and Pei Nanwei. Judging from their accents, they were scholars from the Central Plains. Most likely, they had heard that Yanji County was full of beauties and could be easily found on the streets. Therefore they came here to try their luck. Bailiang women were bold and unrestrained, so they might have a short-lived marriage. The 3 young scholars had already seen the beautiful young woman behind them. Due to etiquette and self-esteem, they didn't have the nerve to strike up a conversation with her. Therefore, they could only slow down their steps and deliberately speak in a loud voice. It was as if they were competing to see who could speak more shockingly. Some said that they were relatives of a certain official in Lingzhou, and would soon enter the county government office to become an official. Some said that it had always been the Liang dynasty who had been watching Bailiang with ulterior motives. Now that West Chu was about to be reinstated, Bailiang could finally sit down and eat melon seeds while watching the imperial court make a fool of itself. There were also some who said that since childhood, they had yearned for the iron horses and golden spears of the frontier fortress. Which scholar had given up the scholarly honor that was within reach and had come to this impoverished land to enlist in the army? When Su Fengnian heard one of the scholars mention the endlessly prattling West Chu's victory and defeat, he smiled and quickened his pace. He took the initiative to ask, "Young master, how do you know that the rain station of West Chu is destined to end miserably within half a year?" The scholar, who did indeed have a somewhat refined temperament, did not reply to Su Fengnian. Instead, he shot a glance at Pei Nanwei and introduced himself. "This young one is a descendant of the Fan family in Huansha County, Gangnam-do." Su Fengnian went with the flow and feigned surprise. The Fan family in Huansha County is the most famous county in the south of the old northern Han. I never imagined that young Master Fan's background would be so illustrious. There are only a few families like this in all of Bailiang. It is certain that even the prefects of Bailiang would treat you as an honored guest. It is an honor to meet young Master Fan. The other scholar also hurriedly introduced himself. He was from the Shizhao Zhou family in Dongyue. The remaining scholar, probably because he was of ordinary birth, was speechless and indignant. In reality, the Fan family in Huansha County and the Shizhao Zhou family were flourishing during the spring and autumn period. They were not first-rate families that were unreachable. As long as one had the surname of Fan and Zhou, most of them would be relatives. No one would take them seriously. These 2 scholars had clearly come to Bailiang, where their horizons were not broad, in order to make up the numbers. In this era where even the servants of wealthy families had sharp eyes and could see the depth of a family's wealth with just a belt, such clumsy tricks were not worth mentioning. They had clearly underestimated the abilities of Baelyong's officials. Baelyong was poor, but the poor were the common people who faced the earth and the sky. The officials were not poor at all. Su Fengnian had originally wanted to fish for information and amuse himself. Unexpectedly, Pei Nanwei's words were truly earth-shattering. What does your surnames and names have to do with this old lady? This old lady only likes robust men over 200 gene. The three of you can scram to the side and cool off. It was as if the three scholars had been struck by lightning. Afterwards, they didn't even dare to let out a fart, leaving with their tails between their legs. Su Fengnian gave Pei Nanwei a thumbs up. She ran her fingers through her hair and turned her head. When she turned her head, the corners of her mouth curled up. She had a rare expression on her face that said, "If this old lady doesn't make a move, she will be invincible." Su Fengnian touched the pot that didn't boil. He clicked his tongue and praised, "Baelyong is really a place with good feng shui. Sister Pei has also been infected with heroic spirit." Pei Nanwei scowled coldly. She kicked the back of Su Fengnian's shoe and twisted it hard. Su Fengnian was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion, let alone pain. He muttered to himself, "It's only been half a year?" Chao Chongqing and Sun Shiji, two great remnants of West Chu, working together shouldn't be so useless, right? Pei Nanwei said coldly, "A lot of people will die." Su Fengnian's eyes were ice cold. He said slowly, "Yes, a lot of people will die. But you also have to know that there are so many people in West Chu who have shaved their hair and fled to Zen. They don't hesitate to shut themselves in cellars and escape into the mountains to become wild elders. They've lost their minds and are patrolling the city in the middle of the night, shouting that everyone is a ghost. They're all living a life worse than death. This group of wandering ghosts who can't forget the West Chu dynasty can't wait to drag their families down with them. You don't even know how to evaluate such foolishly loyal remnants." Pei Nanwei said hatefully, "If they want to die a worthy death, no one can stop them. But don't implicate the innocent people who just want to live a peaceful life and have a good night's sleep." Su Fengnian said with a smile, "In the past, I always felt that you were lifeless, like a female ghost in human skin who haunts ancient temples deep in the mountains. Only today do I know that you can still speak human language. Why don't you stay in Yanji County? Maybe you'll become a living person in the future. When you miss the reeds by Tide Hark Lake, you can go back and take a look." Pei Nanwei said without hesitation, "Okay." Su Fengnian was momentarily absent-minded. He seemed to have said these words to others before. However, Su Fengnian quickly recovered and nodded with a smile. "Then I'll have to show off my status as the heir. I'll ask the governor of Yanji County to arrange a private residence for you where no one will disturb you." Su Fengnian asked for directions and arrived at the governor's mansion. Unfortunately, the governor had also brought a large group of family members to enjoy themselves with the common people. The gatekeeper, who had trained a pair of discerning eyes, saw that Su Fengnian had an extraordinary aura and had him sit in a small room by the side door. After waiting for 4 whole hours, even the gatekeeper was somewhat impressed by the young man's patience. During this time, the gatekeeper solicitously inquired about his well-being and served him tea. Naturally, this was because Su Fengnian had taken advantage of the beauty Pei Nanwei's reputation. Governor Hong Shandong rubbed his eyes as he returned in high spirits. He had never set foot in Baelyong Palace in his life and didn't recognize the young master. However, he recognized the retainer who could only stand. It was the general's personal bodyguard, Su Yanbing. One year, when the general was patrolling the border, he passed by Yanji County. Hong Shandong was fortunate enough to meet him once. This person was actually qualified to eat and drink with the general. His memory was especially vivid. If Su Yanbing had to stand, then who was the young man sitting and drinking tea? Hong Shandong wasn't an idiot. He immediately collected his thoughts and waved his sleeves. With a plop, he knelt on the ground and paid his respects to His Royal Highness who had come to his humble abode. The large group of Hong family descendants crowded outside the small room widened their eyes. The older ones knew the ways of the world and were somewhat fearful. The younger ones' clean eyes were filled with childlike curiosity. Although the threshold of the governor's mansion wasn't low, the highest position received by the governor was only the previous general of Yuzhou. How high was His Royal Highness's position? When this young man put on the yellow official robe and became the king of Bailiang, everyone in Liang would know how high his position was. Hong Shandong didn't have the courage to look at Pei Nanwei from beginning to end. After knowing that this woman with no clear status would live in Yanji County, he was surprised but not happy. He didn't mind enshrining her like a female bodhisattva. This was what he should do. It might not be a merit, but since ancient times, beauties were a source of trouble. If there was the slightest mistake, then wouldn't his originally smooth career come to an end? However, since His Highness the Crown Prince had spoken, Hong Shandong could only grit his teeth and squeeze out a smile to agree. That night, the governor tossed out an elegant residence with mountains and rivers. Su Fengnian had the men of sacrifice secretly greet the spies in Yanji County. The men of sacrifice were originally great spies who had accumulated great prestige. They were familiar with this kind of shady business and could handle it flawlessly. Afterwards, Su Fengnian abandoned the carriage, which was already redundant, and rode with Su Yambing out of the city that very night. They hurried to the familiar Tuma Pass. When Pei Nanwei got off the carriage, she didn't forget to pick up the curtain hat. In the secluded residence with only 2 old servant girls, she stood in the courtyard without saying a word. It was only when she was about to go to bed that she threw the curtain hat in the courtyard. On the dressing cabinet in the room, she caught a glimpse of several boxes of exquisite and expensive rouge. She sneered and said, "It's all a burden." How many of the seemingly valuable items were actually valuable?